happening, everybody? Hi, welcome to the show. It's me, it's Jeff Gerstmann, here with you for The Jeff Gerstmann Show. It's a podcast. We talk about video games, mostly, usually, more often than not, talking about some video games. I don't know. Is that going to happen this way? Who can really say? I got a beverage here. I got this tall, this white can monster is what I needed today. And that's working out pretty well. That's working out pretty well so far. Here we are. It's 2025. That means a lot of things. Obviously, you know, people get all wrapped up in like, oh, it's the new year, and this is that mean, you know, try to wrap things up and wrap up the old year and try to look forward in a concise way. It's you know, it's always messier than that. I think that any attempt to try to rein that sort of stuff in is always sort of silly. But 2025 does mean, you know, the start of a new year does mean that the Consumer Electronics Show is once again upon us. And let me tell you what I love doing, and that's not go to the Consumer Electronics Show. I used to love it, you know, back in the 90s. It was awesome. Because there was no E3, and so video games were shown at CES. And over the years, as all of these trade shows, you know, the rise and fall of E3, all of this other stuff, CES kind of lost its luster in terms of obviously, like, you know, there are very few, if any, video games at CES. There was a push on the part of the people who run CES to try to get video games back at the show in a meaningful way. And as a result, there was one year that they paid us to have a booth. Like normally you got to pay all kinds of money to have a booth and everything. And they were like, what if we just give you a real sweet deal and practically paid us to come to the show and cover it? And it was a gigantic waste of time. It was like this weird cart before the horse sort of thing where they were trying to get the people who cover games to go to CES, thus hoping that would attract people who make games. And as far as I can tell, this lasted a year. So this is something that you would have to do as like part of like a multi-year strategy, right? You'd be like, okay, we're going to start with the press, and then that'll lead to the exhibitors wanting to exhibit games, and this will all work out. But it only was 1 year that they did this. And so we went, and there were like Nintendo was there with like a truck off site, and in the truck they had a couple of GameCube games, and like that was it. The rest of the time was spent wandering around. Like it was awesome. It was just like, hey, do you want to go to Las Vegas for a week with like zero responsibility? I'm like, yeah, sure. Yes, pay me to go to Las Vegas. I'll go, sure. Nowadays, you would have to fucking pay me to go to Las Vegas. But hey, but it was great because we just kind of wandered around and looked at stuff, and that was that. And so there wasn't really anything to do. And that's kind of been the case with CES. Obviously, it is a tech show. It is not a video game show, and sometimes tech intersects with video games, and so we get like tech-related announcements. And so sometimes you'll have like 2 or 3 keynotes at the start of the show where you'll go like, oh, okay, that's relevant. And then the show starts, and it's like, hey man, do you want a fucking a spatula that is gonna tell you when to flip? It's gonna, depending on your mood, it's gonna read your mood with the power of AI. This spatula is going to flip the fuck out of your pancakes and really fucking change your life, you know, like, and all of the dumbest fucking horse shit. There was like, yesterday I saw, you know, because like obviously all of these tech sites, this is like a big deal for them because they go to look at all this fucking bullshit. And I feel like tech sites have really fucking sucked shit for a long time because like tech has really fucking been shitting the bed for years on in terms of like making things that people might actually want or need or use. And so it becomes this cavalcade of like viral, like, look at this stupid fucking thing that no human would ever fucking need. Well, we're gonna make it, or we're just making a prototype and we're not actually gonna make it or whatever. And so you end up with these like, 30-second videos of, hey, look, get a load of this thing. Like that is tech sites now when it comes to CES coverage, is get a load of this thing. And then like, you're going to have a guy break down the specs of some TVs and you're going to go, yeah, all right, they're better. I don't know. I saw it was a Roomba style device. It was like a vacuum. I think it was actually a vacuum cleaner. And also it had an arm on it. So it could, and literally the use case that they were describing for this was so it can pick up the socks off your floor. That's it. That was the pitch. Is that, I mean, like, don't get me wrong. The idea of insane robots that do stupid fucking things, you're like, yeah, cool. This is the Jetsons' future we so richly deserve. But then you see a lot of this stuff and you're like, this is the dumbest shit. Like, this doesn't, it's like a bunch of one-off devices that like barely do, that probably don't even do that thing all that well in the grand scheme of things, that they're pushing is, and of course, somewhere along the way, like, and through the power of AI, we're using computer vision to determine what is a sock. I don't know. I don't know if this particular device is making that pitch, but it seems like a pretty safe bet that it is. And so, like, that's what CES has become. It's become like this clown show. It's become a carnival of like, who's got the stupidest fucking thing that we can look at. And you're like, LG's got a smart speaker. What's it do? I don't know. Fucking sucks. Sucks at doing things that you need to do. Like, I don't know, man. It's really, and it's how long has this been? I couldn't even necessarily put a time frame on it. I'm gonna say at least the last 10 years. But I don't know. Like when I was going to CES in the 90s, when I was going, because that's where video games were, we would spend a little bit of time wandering around and seeing what else was there. And I was very interested in car audio at the time. And so it was nice that all of the like speaker manufacturers had super loud cars there and you could go listen to fucking bass. And so you would find it by just like listening on the show floor and be like, where's that bass coming from? And you would track it down and someone would have a fucking Honda full of subwoofers. And you'd be like, yes, this is why we're here. I'm here to see what Kenwood has to, what does JBL got, like all the audio manufacturers, what are they pushing this year? More speakers, louder speakers. I love it. Great. And so that was not too bad, but I don't know. It's probably one of those things where everyone has their little segment that maybe they care about, much like I would have cared about games, but it's hard. I'm hard pressed to imagine anyone getting like legit, deep, meaningful, good coverage out of like, this is a revolution in the computer automatic vacuum space. And so it all just comes down to just like, here's a bunch of clownish bullshit that no one actually needs, no one really wants. I used to believe in the tech space as something that was out there innovating and occasionally solving actual problems and occasionally making devices that really did feel like they were moving things forward. And I'm trying to think, like, how long has it been since tech and sitting adjacent to a website that covered tech for a lot of years. Like I you see the transition of just like, as they try to like, I don't know, man, we got a whole car section now. Car tech? We built a home that we're going to fill with smart vacuum cleaners. We have a smart home. Come to the smart home. It's in Nashville. And you're like, okay. like all good ideas, but all designed to cover a space that is so rapidly changed in ways that you're just like, this is now just embarrassing. Like you're devoting people with decades of experience at covering these things, you know, in hard and meaningful ways. And it's just turned into just like, all right, let's talk to the fucking guy. He's got a talking paper shredder. Let's go over here and see, what's this paper shredder say? I'm hungry for paper. And you can put celebrity voices on it. Like, hello, William Shatner here. I'm hungry for paper. Oh, Ape's going to be so mad. I shredded all her papers. I'm Bam Margera. You know, like what, you know, it's... I don't know, man. Was the advent and the popularization of the smartphone the last like meaningful thing to happen to technology? Like I think you could make the case, you know, like obviously you have a lot of people trying to promote, and I think that's why a lot of technology and a lot of technology coverage always looks so fucking desperate, because they're so looking for the thing that's going to be like, we're back, baby. And they have convinced each other that they are indeed back, baby, with all of this AI stuff. And the last couple of years of CES has been just like an insane, you know, like here's a bunch of insane bullshit. And it just feels like it's getting worse, because, you know, you have a lot of companies that are not going to be able to put the R&D into, like, I don't even know what that device is. If I knew, I would be a cajillionaire, right? But like, what's the device? What's the next smartphone? It's not fucking, it's a virtual assistant who talks to me and tells me that I sound a little stressed out, and maybe if it changed the lights to more of a mauve in the room, then maybe I would relax. It's going to automatically put on my favorite song, algorithmically determined to be my favorite song. Not the song I want to hear at that time. It's just going to go like, hey man, why don't you listen? You like this song? And I'm like, yes, I do like this song. Yes. I don't know, man. Like it just, it feels like that all these companies are just making things, again, out of a certain amount of desperation and out of a certain amount of like, let's attach it to, let's try to attach it to AI because that's where the money is right now. And we're going to desperately try to cling to whatever we can so that this company can survive. And that's what tech has felt like for me for kind of a while now. It's just like even more so. So I don't know. Everything I've seen coming out of CES that hasn't necessarily been directly related to video games, you just look at and go like, yeah, whatever. Other than that, it's like Dell has decided to rebrand their laptops. They're not going to use the XPS name anymore. And you're like, great. I don't know. Who fucking gives a shit? Like, you know, someone who covers laptops gives a shit. But like, in terms of actual human impact on your life, who fucking cares? How often do you buy a laptop that you even need to know that? How many people out there are like, well, I get Dells because they've got the XPS line, and they're going to go to the store now and go, what? There's no more of that. Oh no, what am I going to do? It's, I don't know. It's nonsense. But in a lot of ways, I think it's always been nonsense, and that's part of the fun. But I think that after this many years of CES and just like consumer tech being this kind of gong show, it's not funny anymore. You know, it's not quaint. It's not like, look at this wild product. Like, I don't fucking care, man. Like we've seen so many years of stupid fucking things come off of that show floor, and sometimes they don't even ship. But now all of it is just like, here's this AI thing that's going to talk to you on top of whatever bad idea we had. We've now integrated it into a service that will probably fail in the next 18 months. So here, buy a hot brick. Good luck. Yeah. So I don't know. But you know, it was always fun to go because it was a big show. It was big. At times it was even bigger than E3. And so it just felt like a big trade show. It felt like a big to-do, if you will. And that's there's something to that, just from the like, let's go, you know, everyone is working towards whatever this goal is on the tech end, and you're there to cover stuff. And like, you know, like there's it's easy to get swept up in that end of it. And so I see why the people that cover tech are still sometimes, I'd say, immune to it, but sometimes it feels like they just have blinders on to the reality of it because they're just like, well, this is what I cover. And so I'm just going to say, wow, look at this great thing, because otherwise, what am I doing with my life? You know, like that sort of thing. You could apply some of that to video games. You could apply some of that mentality to video games at times over the years too, I'm sure. Look, let's take an ad break. We'll come back and we'll talk about the 2 or 3 things at CES that might actually matter to you as a video gameist, as a video game player, whatever it is you do. And we'll be right back. It's time to organize. It's time to prioritize what matters most. That's right. It's a new year. And you know what matters? Saving some money, or at least not wasting it. Thanks to Rocket Money, your goals can be achievable. Rocket Money shows you all of your subscriptions right in one place and will help you easily cancel the ones you forgot about. Rocket Money also pulls together all your spending across all of your different accounts so you can clearly track those spending habits and see where you can be cut back. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. That's right. Just the ability to see all your subscriptions in one place and really get a look at how much per month is going out the door for this stuff is amazing. And if you don't want some of those anymore, and I'm willing to bet that you've got at least one in there that you're like, oh man, I forgot I signed up for this thing. I was gonna cancel this before the trial ended, and oh geez, now I got this. And Rocket Money can help you cancel those unwanted subscriptions. You can easily create a personalized budget with custom categories to help you keep your spending on track. See your monthly spending trends in each category and know exactly where all of your money is going. They'll let you know if a bill increases in price, if they see any unusual spending activity, or if you're close to going over a budget that you've set. They've got a new goals feature in there that automatically saves money for you, so you don't have to think about it. You can pay off credit card debt, put away money for a house, or just build your savings. Rocket Money can make it easy. They'll also even try to negotiate lower bills for you. Rocket Money will automatically scan your bills and find opportunities to save, and then you can ask them to negotiate on your behalf. They'll deal with customer service so that you don't have to. Just the savings in time on that one sounds amazing. It's just think of how much time, phone trees and all this other stuff, they're always talking like, oh, we're going to make it easier for people to cancel subscriptions, and I'll believe it when I see it. Until then, Rocket Money can help make this a reality for you. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/JeffG today. That's rocketmoney.com/JeffG. rocketmoney.com/JeffG. And we're back. Hello. NVIDIA, the AI company. They've decided to bestow upon you access to new graphics cards. That's right. Graphics cards for you. They're not just, it's not just for generating nude photos of John Cena anymore. You can now play video games on NVIDIA hardware. They went ahead and announced in great detail the next generation of graphics cards, the 50 series cards, the 50. Well, I guess there's four. There's 4 cards overall. The 5070, the 5070 Ti, the 5080, and the 5090. This is all going to come with DLSS 4, which from the folks who went to the keynote and were able to mess around with a 5080, like your friends at Digital Foundry, they are saying that it is a pretty big step up in terms of the previous generations of that. This is basically the biggest DLSS step up since DLSS 2. New to the 50s, a lot of this technology is going to be coming to the previous generations of cards, with obviously less muscle. The one new feature that is exclusive to the 50 series cards is the idea of multi-frame generation. Frame generation is something they brought about, I think it was in the 40 series cards is where they first started doing that, if I remember. And basically the idea is like, hey, if your machine can't generate frames as quickly as it needs to, the GPU can generate some for you to kind of basically give you a smoother frame rate than you would be getting otherwise, through the power of AI trained interpolation and what have you, that they are going to kind of generate frames for you. I have found that the frame generation stuff in this series of cards, in my 4090 that I've had for a while now, has been terrible. And that the trade-off of having like these smoother frame rates has been increased latency in a way that like is unacceptable for video games. And so frame generation up till this point has been bad. It's just been bad. I can't think of and it reached a point where I stopped trying it. So it's entirely possible that they have gotten better about it over the course of this generation of cards. But I've not heard. No one's been saying, "Oh, it's good now. They fixed it. It's always kind of been the issue. Is like if you're turning on frame gen, then there's a hit to your input latency, and fuck that. Like what, I'm here to fucking play video games. I didn't spend this kind of money to play video games in a way that felt like I was playing it over NVIDIA fucking GeForce Now or whatever, Like I'm spending money on this hardware to motherfucking play video games in as a hardcore a fashion as possible. And so just the concepts of some of these technologies is flies in the face of that sort of stuff. Now they are saying that they are going to have the ability to generate multiple frames between real frames, thus enabling higher frame rates on the user end, on what your eyeballs are seeing, without necessarily rendering every one of those frames for real. I didn't see anything in any of the discussion around this technology and the stuff that they are doing to say, hey, and the latency is better now, which is maybe weird because I feel like that has become the rep of like that's. I don't think that's just me saying that. People in chat right now are saying, yeah, you're right. The frame generation stuff has not been good. And so I would figure that they would want to get out ahead of it and say like, yes, we're generating more frames and it will not feel like trash. They probably wouldn't use those words, but you know what I mean. And so having that be like the one big, the rest of it is like, hey man, it's bigger. It does more. And a lot of their goals are kind of run in conjunction with a new set of monitors that have also been announced either at the CES or just before. A lot of this stuff feels like it is built for performant 4K graphics at like way above 60 frames per second. And so we've seen some monitors be announced over the past couple of weeks here that are capable of doing 4K 240, which is nuts. I mean, I'm running 1440p 360 hertz here. And that feels like a criminal amount of possible frames. And so in some ways, this feels like that they are striving to make this the first generation. And the 40 series cards are capable of it in a good number of games. I've been experimenting with that more and more kind of as I've been overhauling all of this capture gear and everything. That like 4K performant 4K graphics have kind of been elusive. And so the idea of 4K 60 hasn't always seemed like an attainable thing, maybe until some games on these 40 series cards. You know, some games you turn up all the bells and whistles and everything, and you try to run them at 4K, like it doesn't, you know, it's not something that's going to always feel or look great. And so this is their push to try to basically get to a point where, yes, now you can have performant 4K graphics, assuming, and no one's going to have these numbers yet, because no one, you know, it's like the people that have been doing benchmarks or doing all of this testing over the past day or so have had a very limited amount of time with a 5080 card, not even a 5090. And so they're out there with, you know, like Digital Foundry's out there with an engineering sample trying to run as many tests as they can in the time that they've been allotted to, you know, mess with the card. And so we won't see numbers like this, I think, probably until the graphics cards are actually in everyone's hands, which is later this month. I want to know what's the actual raw power. What do we get when you turn off DLSS? What do you get when you know, because I've actually reached a point where I am turning off DLSS in as many games as I can. There are some games that don't run acceptably well like that, and so you're like, okay, well, I can turn it on, and you know, it'll smudge a little bit here and there. It'll look a little weird occasionally, and well, I don't know. Is that better? I don't know. What's better, fake smooth frame rate or fake visual quality that sometimes takes a weird shit, and you're like, oh. DLSS just sometimes looks fuzzy, and you know, because it's taking a lower quality image and up-resing it. And it's doing a damn good job. All of this technology is like fucking incredible. But it doesn't always work as well as if you were just rendering these games natively. But of course, increasingly that's become a difficult thing to do. And so instead of trying to just brute force it by like, okay, we've got more transistors, we've got more here, and now you can just more throughput, more pixels. You know, all of these companies have instead pursued this upscaling technology. You know, obviously that's one of the driving factors in the PlayStation 5 Pro is this kind of like model trained ability to upsample games running at a lower resolution to get them up to 4K. And I don't know, like it's an astounding technology. It's amazing that they got all this stuff to work at all, but you know, it's not the same. It's not the worst thing in the world. When we're talking about things that get labeled as AI, this is maybe not the most egregious use of this stuff. Because at least it is all running locally on your machine, and it is not running in insane high-powered cloud servers and all this other bullshit. But it's I don't know. It's some of that stuff is frustrating. So you know, whatever, they're upgrading it, and presumably that, you know, basically every one of the, you know, little feature check marks that they have rolled out over the past handfuls of generations of cards, they are saying, hey, it's going to be better now. So NVIDIA Reflex, which is a technology they use to try to lower the input latency, that I've actually had pretty good, you know, like I have become a big fan of NVIDIA, of On Plus Boost, because fuck it, man. I'm here to play video games. And I think that has been pretty good on the input latency end, but not enough to offset frame generation. They are upgrading that. They're calling it Reflex 2 now. And yeah, you know, it's a series of upgrades across the board in terms of the features that they have rolled into these cards over time. So we have Reflex 2, we have DLSS 4. They are upgrading ray reconstruction, which is, I guess, if you want to try to simplify what that is, it's sort of like what if you could up-res your ray tracing, you know, in kind of a, you know, a weird way. And Yeah, so basically they are enhancing all of their stuff. DLAA, which is the anti-aliasing that you can kind of use instead of DLSS. If you don't need the DLSS stuff, DLAA has actually been not bad. They're saying it will be improved stability and higher detail in motion for that, as well as DLSS super resolution. Increased stability with lighting detail with ray tracing is their bullet point for the enhanced ray reconstruction. Frame gen, they're saying increased performance and reduced memory usage. And for multi-frame generation, it just says multiplies performance by generating multiple frames. And so the idea there, again, is, if you are running at above 60 frames per second, then you can generate multiple frames between your real frames to kind of fill in some of those gaps. So sort of a more efficient and more powerful take on frame generation is sort of, again, that is the one wholly new feature for the 50 series cards. Everything else appeared on 40 series cards. Frame gen debuted there. So 30 series cards, they say, will still get better ray reconstruction, better super resolution, and better DLAA for the 20 series and the 30 series. Obviously those cards are not as powerful, and it's interesting. They said, and some of their charts and graphs and everything kind of bear it out if they're to be believed. But when they ran down the lineup of like, hey, and issued all their press releases about what all this stuff is capable of, for the 3 lower end cards, the line on all of them was like, it's twice as powerful as their 40 series counterpart. So like the 5070, twice as powerful as the 4070. The 5080, twice as powerful as the 4080. For the 5090, they did not use that verbiage. And when you look at some of the performance charts and graphs that they are using for this stuff, there are games that are showing 2x performance with DLSS 4 versus DLSS 3 and everything. But all of these numbers are weird and don't feel like apples to apples comparisons because, again, they're throwing in frame gen and all this other stuff, all the other bells and whistles that they do. And so we haven't really seen something that's like, here's just a look at the raw performance increase from a 4090 to a 5090. And I bet that number is probably not very impressive sounding, which is why they would not include it. But obviously they're investing in all of these technologies, so it's only natural that they would focus on what those technologies can do for games. And I think that this stuff, like DLSS, is really impressive technology. Again, I don't necessarily mean to overly shit on it. I just think sometimes it looks bad. And that's why I kind of like it from the basic idea is, as we get down to lower powered platforms, as we get down to the handhelds, the Steam Deck, as we get to consoles, all of this sort of stuff, when we start talking about using this sort of technology there on these lower powered, more reasonably priced platforms, I think that it's funny to call consoles reasonably priced these days when the console that does that type of upresing is $700, but that's where we are. Because we're about to talk about pricing for this stuff. And I think that stuff makes sense, when you can do it right. And I don't think it's necessarily been done super well on some of those handhelds yet. Like, it's one of those things that, like, it's technically there, but you may not want to deploy it until they've had some time to really sit and think about it and maybe iterate on that technology a couple more times. At the high end, doing this sort of stuff at the high end is sort of a bummer. You kind of wish, I don't know. I wonder what it would even call it. It's probably impossible, but the idea of just like, how much money could you spend to not have to fucking dick around with any of this stuff? Make my frames real. I don't want to generate frames. I want the real thing, But again, that's a perception thing, and I bet a lot of people don't even necessarily notice the difference in a major way. And sometimes I turn all that stuff on, and you notice the difference, but it is a minor difference. And so it becomes this trade-off again. And I have always sided on the side of give me more frames over image quality a lot of the time. And so, it's sort of we're creating a situation. I guess what I'm actually saying here is they have created a situation where a lot of these performance settings and options are starting to come down to personal preference, and how much do you value full real path traced lighting? Because if you want that, then you're going to need to turn on some of these bells and whistles to make it possible, because it's not performant if you do it the quote unquote real way. And so how much do you value that over that? And where do you want to spend your budget in terms of that stuff? And some of that comes down to the people making the games. Where do they want to spend their time? What do they want to optimize in favor of? And what are the sorts of things they want to put in their game versus, hey, sometimes they're going to make those decisions and you as the user can decide to turn some of those things off in favor of increased image quality or in favor of a better frame rate or whatever. And I don't know, like I don't want to have to think when it comes to graphics settings, especially like that was one of the cool benefits about buying the high-end graphics card was you just slid every slider to the right and laughed maniacally while you were doing so. And you went, yes, turn it all on. And it's not really that anymore. And, how much that matters to you is again, I think a lot of it comes down to personal preference and all of that sort of stuff. And again, we back into the very idea that a lot of people simply cannot afford this stuff or do not want to spend the type of money on this. The 5090, the flagship card, the most powerful GPU on the planet, presumably, will start at $2,000. $2,000 motherfucking dollars. $2,000. Now I know what you're saying. Hey, I paid more than that for a 4090 on the black market, on the gray market from scalpers back when the 4090 came out. So if I can get a 5090 for $2,000, that's a fucking deal. So that and the 5080. The 5080 is $1,000. It's going to go on sale alongside, I believe the 80 and the 90 will hit shelves for about 4 seconds on January 30th. The other cards will end up launching, I believe they're saying February for the 5070 and 5070 Ti. Why not just call it the 5060? What are we doing? Why do you have to go like, no, this is the Ti? Just why did you need to do this? Let me see if I can get you pricing on those other cards. I thought I had it here, but apparently I do not. Okay, yes. So January 30th for the 5090, $19.99. What a bargain. $9.99 for the 5080, $750 for the 5070 Ti, and $549 for a 5070. Okay, the 80 is also coming in February. Okay. So it is no, that's not right. That's not right. The 5080 is January. The 70s are going to be released in February. So not that much of a lag time if you want to try to get in on one of these smaller cards. On the video encoding front, they're saying it's like 5% more efficient on HEVC encoding and also 5% more efficient on AV1 encoding. Now, this is, maybe you don't care about this stuff. This is kind of the only stuff I care about. And 5% might not seem like a lot, but there is a gap between when you use NVEnc, when you use NVIDIA's encoder to encode video. It goes lightning fucking fast, and it's rad. It's truly mind-blowing how fast these motherfucking things can encode video. But there is a trade-off when you use, and this has gotten better with every generation of these cards. But there is a trade-off. If you encode this with your CPU instead of your GPU, yes, it may take, let's call it 100 times longer to encode that video. But it will also be more efficiently compressed. It will use the bitrate in more intelligent ways and all that other stuff. The NVIDIA video encoders are designed for blinding speed, and for obviously for the purposes of live streaming and everything else, unmatched. Like that type of hardware encoding. And a handful of different hardware has been built over the years to do this in a variety of ways. Whether it's NVINC, AMD has a similar solution. Intel has obviously their the Battle Mage cards are in the process of coming out, or they came out and sold out, and whatever. Those have these types of encoders on them as well. Some of these encoding technologies are like a 5% increase in efficiency actually is in some cases enough to close the gap on certain types of GPU versus CPU compression. You're still probably going to get a better overall compression, a better overall, more efficient, whatever, higher image quality, better bitrate distribution, whatever it is you're looking for. You're probably still going to find a better solution with CPU encoding on that front. However, that's going to take you a very long time. As someone who was encoding a full-length movie into AV1 recently, it was a situation where, like, yeah, I could do this on my GPU and it would take fucking like 9 minutes to do this whole movie, but I only want to do this once, and I want to do it right, and I want to have it be good and whatever, blah, 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 blah. So instead, you say, well, I'm going to do it on my CPU. Now, this CPU is no fucking slouch either. I bought it earlier. Well, I bought it, I guess, last year now. And that AV1 encode took about 3 hours. And that's 3 hours of every fan on this machine spun up full on. You're sitting there wondering, like, I wonder how many dollars in electricity it's costing me to have this really clean encode of this movie my daughter watches over and over again. All of this so I can put a Blu-ray back on a shelf and not have to get it out for her and blah, 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 you know. But whatever, it's done. And it came out looking great. So obviously, there's always going to be more work to do on that front when it comes to GPU video encoding versus, CPU video encoding when it comes to those sorts of tasks. You know, it's not there yet. But any increase, especially with a codec as young as AV1 still kind of is, matters. And so, so that's fairly exciting, I guess, on that front. If you are looking for that sort of stuff, some of the decode, like it's a more capable, like the media block, I guess, the part of the GPU that is devoted to that sort of stuff has seen some interesting improvements that, if you're in that line of work, may matter for you. And so that's kind of the GPU story. You know, right now it's a bunch of graphs. It's a bunch of graphs that say, like, Cyberpunk runs over 2 times better. But without, like, the graph is like, it's 2 bars. The 4090 bar, which is always locked at, and they're measuring 1x. And so the 4090 bar is always at 1x. And so they're measuring 5090 performance relative to 4090 performance. And so, like, it's a weird thing where, like, Far Cry 6 with ray tracing enabled is, if I'm just eyeballing this bar chart here, it's, let's say, 1.2x on a 5090 compared to a 4090, which is not super impressive. Alan Wake 2 is well over 2x with DLSS plus full ray tracing. So obviously, if you are involving, you know, these ray tracing loads in this scenario, or full ray tracing, you're going to be seeing a greater benefit. So that seems like a greater benefit for even more modern games. Not that Far Cry 6 is not modern, but it is, you know, a little on the older side of things. And, you know, does not have a DLSS implementation from the sound of things. So I don't know, like from a relative performance stuff, that sounds fine. But I guess the other thing I would say is I feel like the 4090's performance has been, I have been satisfied with the 4090, and it is still handling most of what I throw at it. And I am still able to move almost every slider all the way to the right and laugh maniacally while I do so. And when we back into, again, I'll bring it up again, but when you go look at the Steam hardware survey, let's look at it. It's been a couple of months. What's the most popular, what are the most popular graphics cards used on Steam? December 2024. It is a 3060. Okay, well, you know, we are seeing more 40 series cards in that hunt than we did before, I will say. As availability has improved and so on, I will say that we are seeing more 40 series cards at near the top of this list than we did, you know, even 6 months ago. 3060 is the most popular card, but again, that's at 5.8%. The second one is a laptop 4060 at 4.9%. And then just a straight up 4060 at 4.7%. Under that, we have a GTX 1650 at 4.3%. Then a 4060 Ti, 3060 Ti, 3070, 3050, 3060 laptop, 2060, 4070. Is that it? A 1060 has 3% of the market share on it. AMD's first appearance just says AMD Radeon graphics 2.6%. So it looks like not a lot of the AMD cards get broken out, but the ones that do are way lower. The 4090, the card that I currently own, and this, as far as the Steam hardware, yeah, is that just integrated graphics? If it just says Radeon graphics, yeah, that's probably what that is. The 4090 has 1.16% share on Steam. So 1% of users, if we round it, are using what is currently the most powerful graphics card. So if you are a game developer and resources are more finite than ever because all of the other people you work with just got laid off, how much time are you going to spend really supporting all of those bells and whistles? Now, the answer is you're going to spend as much time as makes sense because you did a co-marketing deal with NVIDIA and because they have put some money into development to ensure that you have a robust DLSS implementation and what have you. If you are one of the leading games coming out these days, they can get those marketing deals and they can do all of that sort of stuff. But in a scenario where a lot of games don't have those benefits and a lot of games are not going to be able to take those deals with any of the graphics card manufacturers to get a little bit of assistance on that front, what sort of choices are they going to make? How will they deploy their, again, finite resources of time and people and money to supporting all of this stuff to the fullest when 1% of the audience will be able to see it? And the 5090, you know, it's not going to launch at 1%. It will launch under that. It'll take time. Like the 4090 is not it is the newest card, but it is not necessarily a new NVIDIA card. And 1% of users have one. Obviously the 5070 is those cards are much more reasonably priced. But even those are, I mean, that's still pricey. How many people go and get a 50 series card? There's interesting competition from Intel this time around on the budget end of things, on the reasonable. So, maybe and those cards are what, like $250 or something for like a B580, if you can find one. And AMD obviously has been fighting, their fights at a lower to mid-range level, and they're just letting Nvidia run away with this high-end market. But what is the high-end market? What does that even mean anymore? And how many games are truly taking advantage of this? And it's like, I think Indiana Jones looks fucking fantastic, and you can turn on all those bells and whistles and it looks fucking incredible. It is a great looking game. And it does all of the lighting tricks and all the cool shit, and you turn it on and you're like, man, this is neat. But that game still runs like pretty well on an Xbox Series X, which, is going to have obviously a subset of those features, because of the power differentials and whatever. So again, all of it just comes down to like, what range of graphics features are you really going to support when most of your audience doesn't have this card? And when you come out and say, hey, this 5090 is going to be $2,000. Now let's reasonably assume that is for the Founders series, the Founders edition card that Nvidia themselves will sell, which is a neat looking card. It's 2 slots. It's like they managed to cram all of this power into a 2-slot card. Of course, the wattage on it is some insane, like I don't think I could put one in this machine without replacing my power supply. I don't remember. I think I remember at the time going, I should get a better power supply than the one that I currently have, because that seems like something that you're going to need. It was around 575 watts of power for a 5090. And so, are you going to go out and get a 1,000-watt power supply? I might just have a 750 in this thing. I don't remember what I ended up doing. I don't think I got a 1,000-watt power supply. So like, I don't know, like it's almost at that point, it's almost marketed at the same sorts of lunatics. It's splitting the difference, right? It used to be only truly fucking crazy people were going out and getting SLIs setups, getting 2 GPUs and running them in an SLI configuration, which is crazy. Setting up 2 graphics cards, and like that was always a boondoggle anyway. It never worked quite as well. When you saw it, you were like, this is awesome. And then it's like, oh, this is a fucking wreck. So at that point, like, is this just for the SLI maniacs, except it's only 1 card, and so it's much easier to set up and much easier to, like, you don't have to dick around and figure out a motherboard and all this other stuff. Like, I don't know. Is it the same type of crazy person that does that sort of stuff? But yeah, I don't know. It seems like it seems like an impressive card. Like you look at the numbers, and obviously we're not seeing like full numbers and full tests because people haven't gotten their hands on the 5090 at all yet. It sounds like, again, they just were doing 5080s. But game developers don't necessarily seem to be, like think about the some of the biggest and best games of 2024. We're talking about Balatro. We're talking about UFO 50. We're talking about, yes, there are high-end games that look great and take advantage of it. Again, that we have games like Indiana Jones that do take advantage of a lot of that stuff. And, obviously those games do exist. But when we look at the wide swath of games that exist in a calendar year and put them against, like, did you really need a 4090 to play this dog? The answer is almost always no. And developers don't seem to be catching up with it per se. It doesn't seem like it's getting, all of the conversations we're having are around, budgets of games and how are we doing, You know, like what are we moving to? Can the engines even do this? Is the CPU a problem? Is this, so many other things that are happening that you just look at and go like, what are the games that are actually going to take advantage of this in a vital way? Yeah, is it Witcher 4? Yeah, I mean, when they showed Witcher 4, they were like, this is running on an unannounced graphics card that is presumably one of these NVIDIA cards. GTA 6 is going to ship on consoles. They haven't even announced a PC version of that game yet. So by the time they get to that, by the time they get around to saying, oh, by the way, we are going to put it out on PC, they'll be porting a PlayStation 5 game. Not that big a deal. So, yeah, I don't know. It's hard, man. Like it's impressive new technology, and you look at it and go like, this is something that, like, yeah, there's but to me, I think any benefit would be on the video encoding end, which already these 4090 cards do that stuff so well that, like, I'm intrigued by it, but it's sort of a weird, I don't know, just a pure cost benefit analysis of a 5090 right now, when I think about what PC gaming has been like for a while, like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. The 4090, I think, in a lot of cases, didn't necessarily make a lot of sense. So yeah, I don't know. It's on Steam, over 50% of Steam users are running at 1080. 1920 by 1080. $1440 represents just under 20% of players on Steam. And then any resolution other than that, you're on your fucking own. It's like it's well under 10%. It's like, all of these ridiculous 1600 by 900, 0.9. You're like, who even, what? 5120 by 1440. That's not a real thing. Yeah, it's a weird, right? And so if most people only have a 30 series card, or, well, not even, like these, if we look at the top 5 cards, 3060, 4060, 3060, 4060 laptop, 4060, 1650, 4060 Ti. That's the top 5 graphics cards. And we look at the over 50% of Steam users are running at 1080p. Who is any of this stuff for? It puts a lot of things into perspective around, like, the value of a console and stuff like that as well. I think when you look at the Steam hardware survey and look at what people are actually running, you go like, okay, like, this is, a $700 PlayStation 5 Pro is maybe not necessarily as insane of a price point. It's not as insane of a price point when taken against how much all of the PC stuff can cost if you want to do better than that, right? So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah, so they have a separate entry for multi-monitor desktop resolution, and so if you are reporting 5120 by 1440 to Steam as your primary display resolution, I assume that means you have them joined in some weird way where it is fooling Steam into thinking it's one monitor, because they have a separate setup for a separate list for multi-monitor desktop res. Most people have 16 gigs of RAM. Number 2 is 32 gigs of RAM. Windows 11 is the leading OS at 54%. And there you have it. Let's take another break and we'll come back. We'll talk about tiny video game machines, what you can hold in your hand after this. Where is my thing? Here it is. Hey, how's the hair doing? Is it, are you losing it? Yeah. Well, it doesn't mean you can't find it again. You can try Hims Hair Loss Solutions, and you'll be joining hundreds of thousands of subscribers who found their hair again. Hims provides you with convenient and quality access to a range of hair loss treatments that work, all from the comfort of your couch. Hims makes treating hair loss simple, with doctor-trusted options and clinically proven ingredients like finasteride and minoxidil that can regrow hair in as little as 3 to 6 months. And how do you want it? You know, what works best for you? You can choose from personalized, chewable, oral, spray, or serum treatments and figure out what's going to work best. The process is simple. It's 100% online, no doctor visits involved. You just answer a few questions online. A medical provider will determine if treatment is right for you. And if you're prescribed, your treatment is sent directly to you for free. No insurance is needed. One low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. Hims has hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, and they can help you get your confidence back too with visibly thicker and fuller hair. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/Jeff. That's HIMS.com/Jeff for your personalized hair loss treatment options. hims.com/Jeff. Results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride. Prescription products require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for full details and important safety information. Tiny PCs, what you hold in your hand. Laptops. The laptops are for lap cops, if you ask me. The other kind of end of CES as it pertains to gaming information is around a small handful of announcements about handheld gaming devices, some running Windows and some running Steam OS. This started yesterday with a very silly... So AMD announced a new set of processors for these types of devices. They announced the Ryzen Z2. The Z1 has been the APU that's been powering a lot of the devices on the market now. Your Steam Decks, your Lenovo Go's, your Asus ROG Allies, and all of that sort of stuff have been powered by the Z1 line. So this is the next generation of that chip, and we knew that this was coming. This was pretty well scouted, I guess, ahead of time. So they went ahead and announced a series of Z2 chips. In the form of the Z2 Go, the Z2, and the Z2 Extreme. The Extreme will be using RDNA 3, according to PC Gamer. Part of AMD's announcement, part of their rollout of this information, was pretty good. During the call, a spokesperson for AMD said, this is at PCGamer.com with the quote, "You'll see this," meaning the Z2 series, "coming to market from a number of partners, the Legion Go, the ROG Ally, the Valve Steam Deck." Now, Valve very quickly got online. Pierre-Luc Griffes, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, took to Blue Sky. He is the developer that is most associated with the Steam Deck. He has been the person that has been, the bulk of interviews about the future of the Steam Deck and statements about the future of the Steam Deck have most often come from him. He says, "There is and will be no Z2 Steam Deck." Guessing the slide was meant to say the series is meant for products like that, not announcing anything specific. So obviously Valve has said already, hey, it's going to be a little bit before we iterate on the Steam Deck because we're waiting for a meaningful upgrade in technology. And so AMD coming out and saying like, oh yeah, the Z2, yeah, you're going to see it in the Steam Deck. Like, very fucking like, absolute, like Valve immediately clamping down on that and being like, no, you will not. And we are not going to make one either. Like, not only is there not one in development, there will not be one. is pretty definitive on their part. And just, you have to wonder how they got that fucked up on the AMD end of things. Which is real, yeah, I don't know. That's a real silly thing. But, you know, hey, these Z2 chips will make their way into other devices. There've been a handful of other devices here being announced, including one that is just like foregoing a lot of that kind of Z2, like the chips made for this type of form factor. Acer announced something called the Nitro Blaze 11. It is an 10.95 inch screen, according to PC Gamer. 144 hertz. But it is basically an 11-inch fucking screen. That's huge. This thing is massive. They should have pictures of people holding this thing, like leaning up against the waterfront, like, I'm out here playing games with this gigantic fucking slab. Like, what are you doing? It looks so stupid. But, you know, it's got a Ryzen 8040. It's got a 780M GPU in it, 16 gigs of RAM, up to 2 terabytes of storage. Like, they made themselves a laptop that doesn't fold at this point. They're like, what if we made a laptop with no keyboard? What if we made a laptop that was just in this gaming form factor, like this iPad-sized thing, but with the width and the depth and the girth of like a fucking Steam Deck or any of these other devices. So it is this thick-ass fucking thing. I thought, yeah, 2.3 pounds, which is PC Gamer notes is more than 3 times the weight of a Nintendo Switch. That seems like something you bring to a rooftop party and pull out the kickstand and use. That doesn't seem like something that you hold in your hand and like, what? $1,100. It'll release sometime in Q2. They also announced something called the Nitro Blaze 8, which, as you might guess, has an 8-inch screen. That'll be $900. So that's the weird end of this stuff. Everything else, I think, is much more in line with what we were expecting out of the kind of the handheld the handheld end of things. Lenovo had been teasing an event that they were like, oh, Valve is going to be at, you know, like we're going to have Valve at our event. And everyone immediately said, oh, you're going to make a third-party Steam Deck. That's exactly what you're doing. And that is exactly what they're doing. They are going to make the Lenovo Legion Go S, which will be a $500 device. It will be the first authorized third-party SteamOS handheld, according to The Verge. Valve has also gone on the record as saying that Lenovo is the only partner they are currently working with in an official capacity, and that this is not some big push on their part necessarily to partner with devices to ship them this way. But it is a sign that they are working on the OS in various ways that will enable it to run on a wider variety of devices. And they've shown, you know, in some of their commits and some of their betas and some of their the builds that they've pushed out, that they are potentially looking to better support SteamOS on a range of these devices. This will just be the one that ships with it. They are also going to ship a Windows version of this thing. And they are officially, you know, Lenovo is kind of branding this as an experiment. And the Steam version is actually the cheap one. So this is, okay, so what do we got here? So the SteamOS version of the Lenovo Legion Go, which is the S variant, I guess, will be $499. It'll have 16 gigs of RAM and 512 gigs of storage. There will be there will be a Windows version that will be $729, but it will have 32 gigs of RAM and 1 terabyte of storage. And also it will come in white, whereas the SteamOS version will be black. So yeah, I don't know. It's a weird thing where they're not going to have the same spec and one runs Windows and one runs SteamOS. Instead, it's like if you want the version with more RAM and more space, you need to get the Windows version. And then I suppose you could potentially backdoor SteamOS onto it if you wanted to. If they make all of that compatible. Valve says they've only been working with Lenovo for a couple of months, according to this Verge story, and that there are things that they are still very much working on when it comes to the integration. It says here, the new touchpad, gyroscope, and both RGB lighting and TDP configuration options are among the things on their to-do list. So there's a little bit more to do there. But it does sound like that is kind of the goal for Valve with SteamOS is, obviously to get this device working, as well as they basically want to for Lenovo, but also to further work on the OS in a way that can make it more compatible with a variety of these handheld devices. And I suppose even set-top box style mini PCs, if you want something that hooks up to a TV, like, I would assume that when we get to this point where it is a little more open, that there's nothing stopping you from putting it onto a full-on PC, depending on what sort of parts they support and whatever else. But there should, I assume, be a handful of ways for you to get SteamOS onto a thing. That seems like that would be their eventual goal. If not to market their very own kind of Steam machine, hook it up to your TV type of thing, then to at least get to a point where they've got a support across a wider swath of hardware that allows you to, install it yourself and experience the magic of Proton in your very own home. It's a hell of a thing. I don't know you. So, as a Steam Deck fan, I'm left kind of cold by some of this stuff. The Lenovo Go, the Go S, the Legion Go S is I guess it is a higher resolution and higher frame rate. It is a 120 hertz variable refresh rate screen, which is cool. That's better than the existing Steam Deck. But yeah, there's I don't know. There's certainly potential in that, but I don't know if any of this is necessarily leading me to think hey, it's time for me to replace the Steam Deck with something else. It doesn't feel like there's a true successor in the space yet. And maybe one of these Z2 powered devices that will probably come over the next year. We're not seeing the full. There's still more to announce on that part, I think, when it comes to, whatever Asus does with the next iteration of the ROG Ally. For all you Armory Crate fans out there, what a great piece of software. Everyone loves it. But presumably, there's sort of a, we get to a more interesting decision point, when more of these devices have launched, and maybe you start to see clear-cut performance differences. And obviously, battery life is going to matter for some of you that, that very much do want to take this on the go. My Steam Deck lives near bed, and so it's become my bed computer for all the bed computing I'm doing. And so I don't necessarily care about the battery life that much. But the Legion Go S is shipping this month. It is right around the corner. The Verge says Lenovo isn't going all in on SteamOS. Not only will it hedge its bets by shipping a Windows version of the Legion Go S as well, but it'll also ship with Windows this month, 4 months ahead of the SteamOS model. So that white Windows model is coming this month. You have to wait 4 months. obviously Valve says that they're not done, and they've only spent a couple of months so far working on this Steam OS stuff. So, yeah. But yeah, the Z2 Go will be in the Legion Go S, and so you will get a taste of this is the kind of the lower end of the Z2 spec. But as far as an experiment, and like experimenting with Steam OS, like Lenovo doesn't really seem like it's setting this experiment up to succeed by having it ship later and having it ship with lower specs than the Windows variant. That's sort of a weird thing. They are also working on the Legion Go 2. They didn't really say too much about it. They had some prototypes that they brought to CES, according to The Verge, but it has detachable controllers and an 8.8-inch OLED screen. That's kind of all that they are saying about the Legion Go 2. But obviously they're launching this stuff, in the first quarter or so of this year. And so, does the Go 2 happen around the end of the year? I don't know. So that's kind of where things lie right now with this stuff. It's like, it's the news we were expecting. It's the Z2 chip. It's hey, here's the range of Z2 chips that are going to power the next generation of these handheld gaming PCs. But like the hardware, the announcement end of it feels murky. There was not a clear cut, and here's a fucking hero device. Here's a big flagship Z2 device that you're going to look at and go, oh, holy shit. Like no one has that yet. And I guess that makes sense because I this space is still relatively nascent. Even when you take into account Aya and Odin and all the other weird mini PCs that have existed for decades in a very non-mainstream way. This is still, as far as like, hey, you're going to walk into a store and buy one of these. This is still very early days. And so in some ways, all of it still feels experimental. I think it's a very successful experiment, and I think that they've proven that there is a desire for this. I mean, if you think about it, this all kind of comes back to the Switch, and I don't necessarily think that the Steam Deck is using the Switch as inspiration. I think it's just that the hardware lined up in such a way that it made sense for them to do something like this. And, the Switch is enough of its own thing that it's hard to say that, oh, this was the clear inspiration for this. But what the Nintendo Switch did do is show that there's a widespread, mainstream, worldwide desire for a handheld gaming device that can be a little bit bigger than a Game Boy or a 3DS or any of the stuff that we think of as a handheld prior to this. And so now everyone is trying to get it. That's why we see Sony and Microsoft both talking about handhelds. It's why we see this space kind of spinning up in interesting ways and trying things out. And all of it is proving, I think, that there is room for a device like this. And I think people just want a certain amount of power to go with it. I guess I'll put it this way. People want, if you're not going to have the benefit of first-party Nintendo games, if you're not going to have the benefit of here's the new Mario game, you would better have a more powerful machine that can run all kinds of stuff and be like a very good jack of all trades gaming device, because you're not going to have that benefit. Even first party Sony will only go so far down that road. I think we'll see. But yeah, it's such a wild and exciting space for gaming hardware because it just feels so fucking strange, especially when you start to lump in all of the Android and Linux based, like the kind of retro themed handhelds that are all that stuff coming out of China. We start thinking about the Ambernick devices and the Retroids of the world and all of that other insane stuff. Like there's just such a glut of weird devices on that end of things. And it's I don't know. It's just a really weird, it's a really weird time for handheld games. let's take our last break, and then we'll come back and we'll cover the rest of the news, and we'll probably, we'll talk about the game of the year a little bit. How about that? Talk about game of the year. Be back. Well, the holidays may be over, but it's never too late to give yourself what you really want. Treat yourself with the iRestore Elite and get the hair regrowth solution you actually deserve. This isn't just some weird gadget. It's a powerful, FDA-cleared laser cap designed to fight thinning hair and hair loss with clinically proven results. With 282 lasers and LEDs delivering light therapy to your scalp, it's like a spa day for your follicles. Let's face it, it's cold outside. Staying in is the vibe. So if you're, binge watching shows or just, hiding under the blankets or something like that, the iRestore Elite fits seamlessly into your self-care routine. It's lightweight, hands-free, and completely painless, so you can kick back, relax, and let it do all the work. And for a limited time, you can save $625 off the iRestore Elite at irestorelaser.com/JeffG. Head to irestorelaser.com/JeffG to get the hair regrowth device you've been wishing for and, start feeling like yourself again. So this is, it's as they say, it is an FDA-cleared laser cap. And what you do is you put it on your head and you wear it for 12 minutes a day. It's got a little built-in timer. So you can just sit down, hit the button on it, relax. Maybe you're at your desk typing, maybe you're sitting on the couch, or maybe you're looking at your phone. You just kind of just sit there for a little bit and chill. And then it'll beep when it's done. And you take it off and go about your business. Super easy to integrate into whatever routine you've got going on. iRestore is so confident in their products, they offer a 12-month money-back guarantee, so you can gift it risk-free. And if their skin doesn't look healthy, you'll get a full refund, no awkward questions, just results or your money back. Now is the perfect time to treat yourself. For a limited time only, you can get $625 off the iRestore Elite when you use that code JeffG at irestorelaser.com. That's $625 off the iRestore Elite. Go to irestorelaser.com/JeffG and use the promo code JeffG to let them know. Hair loss, it's frustrating. You don't have to fight it alone. Thanks to iRestore. All right, we're back. And I think the last little bit of CES news came out of Sony's keynote. Not obviously, Sony has a lot of stuff. Usually I watch Sony's keynote because it's got the widest range of weird, dumb shit. Like last year, they brought out that car and they were like, here's Gran Turismo running on a car. And you're like, that's very stupid. And because I want to see what blogger cameras they're going to announce every year because, I don't know. Sometimes because I've already spent too much money on cameras. Because I've already spent too much money on cameras I think I can push this button and I think I can even, see, I'm up here now. Like I've got this other, this webcam I bought that is actually terrible looking and washed out in garbage. I still have it plugged in, but it's over there. I'm like in the middle of reorganizing all of these shots. PlayStation, or Sony rather, usually doesn't get, doesn't really get too far into video game stuff as a part of their CES show. There's always sort of a bit of lip service and then another little announcement. The only real announcements here were around movies. They're going to make movies based on Helldivers and Horizon Zero Dawn. That's sure. Columbia Pictures is working on the Horizon Zero Dawn film. Sony Pictures is going to work on Helldivers. We're developing a film adaptation of our amazingly popular PlayStation game, Helldivers 2. Now I know what you're saying. Helldivers 2 is just Starship Troopers, you fucking dumbasses. And I will say, yeah. But I don't know. There's nothing like, sure, man. What if you got Starship Troopers, but with less Scientology? Somewhat less. That's something to that, I suppose. No, I'm thinking of Starship Earth. I've always fucking, Helldivers to Battlefield Earth. Yeah, God. I always got John Travolta on the brain. I don't know, man. I love Starship Troopers. And then they made like a zillion different sequels to it. And then, well, no, I'm right. What the fuck is with Casper Van Diem? At some point, Casper Van Diem went like all in on some fucking weird shit. Was it Scientology or was it something else? There was a point where he yeah, I don't know. It was, yeah. Anyway. I know at some point Casper Van Diem like started getting real weird out there, but that was a very long time ago. That was when he was in like the intro to On the Spot. They did that interview with him about the Starship Troopers game, and oh my God, real interesting dude, let's say. Helldivers, yeah, I don't know, man. Like there's nothing wrong with Helldivers in like, I think they do a good job with their like, super Earth, whatever, mega democracy managed whatever, like the jokes they wrote for that are basically Starship Troopers. I think that stuff works just fine. Could you make a movie out of that? Sure, you absolutely could. Should you? I don't know. It's such a blank slate that I guess the answer ultimately is yes, because it is such a blank slate. You might as well, because you can write any story you want in there against the backdrop of fascism and fighting bugs, right? Any story you want to tell, local boy makes good and kills all the big bugs. Sure. Boy becomes a helldiver, realizes that this whole thing is just a cover for fascism and rises up against it. Sure, you could do that too. Yeah, I don't know. I guess those are the two plot lines. Horizon, I think the first Horizon has a pretty good story as far as video games go. I think that the setting of that game, I think the nature of Aloy's character is good. I think that the second game took a lot of that storyline and took it in a real kind of mindless direction. But a retelling, or rather yes, I think if you took the story of the first Horizon game of her uncovering her true nature and all of that other stuff, I think you could absolutely do that and it would work just fine. Is that like an amazing story? Like, I don't know, not especially, but you could certainly, there have been worse movies, I guess, is what I'm saying. Those, as far as plots or premises for films, like, sure, I don't know, you could do it. Do you need that? I guess like the interesting kind of conversation I've seen come up around this announcement has been a lot of people saying like, why do no one likes, like, basically saying no one likes Horizon enough for it to be worth all of this stuff. And it's an interesting take that I think I have felt bits and pieces of this, but haven't really seen people put voice to it. I liked Horizon 1 just fine. I think as a story in a video game, I think it worked very well. Again, I think you take that story and pull the interactivity out of it and try to say, here's a 2-hour movie or whatever. I think it gets a little like, I don't know, like, yeah, okay. That sounds a little average to me. That sounds a little kind of whatever. But like, I saw it in here in the chat while we were talking about it. Someone said like, is Horizon anyone's favorite game? Which I don't know. Like, I think it's a solid number 2. It's a solid number 3. When it comes to Sony's lineup of first-party games, I think it definitely hangs in that group of games, and I think it makes a strong case for itself in the context of the stuff that Sony makes. Like, yeah, this fits right in there with all that stuff. Is it somehow the best thing going? Like, no, probably not. No, probably not. But it's I don't know. Again, the story in that first game was good enough that I think if you pulled that out and put it into a film, sure. I don't know. It's another video game movie that I will, maybe not get around to seeing, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. Also, a Ghost of Tsushima Legends anime was announced. Crunchyroll is going to be involved in that, I guess. It's very specific. It's like, okay, this isn't the story from Ghost of Tsushima. It's a story from Legends, the multiplayer mode. So even further removed from the story-driven stuff, but there was a story in that. It's a weird carve of the IP into what they're going to focus on for the anime. I think that could, that's sure that could potentially work, I guess. I don't know. It's just something, I don't know. Like the Sony's first party games chase after, and Helldivers is a bit of an exception to this, but it was developed externally. So, I think it makes sense that it doesn't necessarily fit the blueprint, but so much of the first party PlayStation output is so very focused on this cinematic presentation and this goal of trying to recreate film and try to have stories and try to make properties and IPs that stand up to film, which I think is kind of a weak goal, because who the fuck cares about film? Video games are bigger than movies dollar-wise, and I think that chasing after that sort of stuff, I think, is kind of embarrassing. I think it sort of sends this message of just like, that like you yourselves view video games as somewhat second class. The reality of it isn't quite as, it ain't that deep. Ultimately, it's, hey, we own this IP and we have a motion picture company over here. So we get to use it pretty much for free. Should we just go ahead and make a thing based on this because we own it already? That's really ultimately I think that's about as deep as it gets. But I do think that there's a certain aspect of this that is this weird Ouroboros, just like the very idea of like, okay, we're going to make The Last of Us and it's going to be this incredibly cinematic and affecting, and like we're really trying to tell this dismal story and very clearly inspired by prestige television and all of this other stuff, and then to turn that back around and turn that into prestige television, and now here we are again doing it with Helldivers of all things. It's just weird. It's just weird, and when it all comes together, it's fine. Like the all the individual pieces on the wheel, as long as they're okay, right? And so in some ways there is sort of a who cares aspect to this, because at least it's like more well considered than video game movies were 20 years ago. 15 years ago, when Uwe Boll was out there getting it done. It feels like that there's a little bit more of a consideration involved to like, well, this IP, we need to honor it. We need to not just shit on it and make a movie that is like 5% tied to this thing. Like, they're doing a much better job of representing the nature of these video games in these films. Does that make them like great standalone? Like, not always. I don't know. Like, that doesn't mean that they're like standalone amazing on their own, but people did really seem to enjoy The Last of Us. So, that was certainly successful. It's just sort of a weird situation, I guess, particularly when it comes to the PlayStation properties, because so many of them spend all of this time chasing after these linear non-interactive mediums, and as someone who likes games and cares significantly less about TV shows and films, maybe that's, I think like part of this conversation and part of the cycle and seeing the cycle of it is starting to make me realize why I don't necessarily gravitate towards a lot of the first party PlayStation franchises, because they're chasing after this thing that I already kind of don't care about. And so when they nail it, it's like, oh, great, you made it like this thing that I don't, all right. What if instead you made sick video games? Some would say that they are doing that. I'm not sure that I agree. Lastly, in the news, a batch of freaking, I don't know. This isn't even news anymore. A bunch of additional Switch 2 stuff leaked. Picture of a motherboard, another picture of the dock, a cleaner picture of the Joy-Cons. This is like, whatever. Who cares? The motherboard shot is interesting because it does, you see an NVIDIA logo on one piece of it and you go like, oh yeah, okay, yeah. Sure. Of course it was going to be this. We already knew it was going to be this, but yes. So I don't know. Yeah, there's just not that much not that much to discuss there. The conversations around this stuff has been really weird because there's been like the kind of like forum thread thing of like, I can't believe Nintendo hasn't announced the Switch. They're ruining it by having all of these leaks and blah, blah, blah. No, who fucking gives a shit? In the grand scheme of things, no one fucking cares. This happens with the iPhone every couple of years. Where the iPhone fully leaks ahead of Apple's announcement. Do you know how much it impacts people's interest in the official announcement and how much it impacts the eventual sales of the unit? Motherfucking zero. It doesn't fucking matter. Like what you see, you saw a picture of the motherboard and now shame on Nintendo for not having gotten out ahead of this shit. Like what fantasy world do you live in where you matter? Guy who tracks leaks on a message board. It's fucking ridiculous, dude. These are going to be big mainstream devices with big mainstream announcements that will reach people that simply do not give a shit about any of this stuff. And if they do look it up, that's because they were already going to buy one anyway. So the very idea that like this is somehow like harming Nintendo, which has been a narrative I've seen a few people try to push over the last week, is fucking ridiculous. It's just the stupidest fucking thing in the world. Presumably that this announcement is right around the corner because, obviously they have a lot of these parts. And the other thing is, in Taste Stamp says, it's silly that Nintendo was taking so long to announce this thing already. No, it isn't. Because you know why? Nintendo wanted to have one last Christmas. Nintendo wanted to have one last holiday sales push for the existing Switch. This happens all the time. Where they're like, okay, yeah, we know they got a thing around the corner, but like they can't say it while they're trying to sell the other thing. Because if you come out in October and say, hey, the Switch 2 is coming in March or whatever, then no one's going to buy a Switch that holiday. They're all going to fucking wait because the information will get out there in a more direct way, in a more official way. They're like, no, man, you should buy a Switch. It's a really good machine. You should absolutely buy one. And that is why they didn't announce it. To pretend otherwise is insane. To act like they should have done it a different way with the timetable that they've, ended up on, which maybe wasn't even their original timetable. But either way, they've ended up in this situation where, the details are going to be ready around the holiday season. They're definitely 100,000 times % XXX going to announce it after the holiday, not before the holiday. Like, what is wrong with people? Like, this is just basic stuff. I don't know. So yeah, the ramp up in leaks and the ramp up in looks at the hardware, all that tells you is, yeah, they're manufacturing them. It makes sense that they're going to manufacture them. They should be manufacturing them by now. And we'll see how it nets out in terms of power, in terms of what is this thing actually going to run? What are third parties going to think of it? How much support are they going to dedicate to this device? And all of that. I do think that a lot of people that are going in expecting, like, you know, like, I don't think we're going to see something that is going to be, you know, we see these Z2 chips getting announced and all this other stuff. Like, I don't think anything that NVIDIA is going to be putting into a Switch 2 is going to reach that level of performance, because those are devices that, you know, those companies are willing to sell for $700, $1,100, like the weird price range, you know, $500 in some cases for sure. But it just doesn't make a lot of, I don't think that we see a Switch 2 come along for $500. I think they're going to want something that's a little bit more mainstream priced than that. And so I just, in terms of power and capability, size, thermal perform, you know, like all of the heat dissipation that they are going to have to do, and just all of the sorts of things around this device, I think Nintendo is going to continue to think like a very toy-like company and not a very tech-like company. And so I don't think you can look to, say, just as an example, the, you know, the Legion Go S or whatever, as like an indicator of like, well, the Switch 2 is probably going to be somewhere around here and somewhere around here. Like, it doesn't, I don't think you can guarantee that at all. I think that there are, obviously we will see some sort of performance boost, and, you know, you've seen some of the leaked specs and people trying to walk backwards into what that means for capability. And we'll see how well that ends up coming out at the end. But it's never going to be Nintendo's primary focus. It's just not something that they are chasing. And so I think a lot of it just kind of gets back to the Switch Pro rumors and this idea of like, it's going to be a 4K Switch, it's going to be this and that. And like, you know, there's a lot of stuff in there that you're like, I don't think they really care about that. I mean, they, you know, if that's a knock-on effect of them having a more powerful device, that they're like, okay, well, it runs at 4K now because we're doing some upscaling here, and you know, we've got our own custom DLSS implementation that runs on this hardware or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. It's none of that necessarily sounds like it's going to be some kind of big powerhouse of a device, which should seem relatively obvious at this point, that that's not something that Nintendo chases. But I think every time we get to this point, every time we get to this point where we're hearing more about the device and we're seeing these sorts of various leaks around the capabilities and what's this new thing here and what's this do, and then, you know, like a lot of people start to get caught up in the power conversation, and ultimately I think the only thing Nintendo cares about is the very idea of like, how well will their games run on it? What can their developers do to take advantage of this power that they didn't have previously, and what will matter to them? And the rest of it is just kind of like, you know, a nice little bonus that they get. The third parties get to do some stuff too, or whatever. But we'll kind of see how. You know, it seems like, again, like now that we're on the other side of the holiday, and, you know, CES is going to be done here over the next week or so. You know, you could envision a scenario where Nintendo announces something this month. They'll have to announce. I mean, if not this month, then probably not. You know, like they did say this fiscal year, so they kind of have until the end of March to announce it. And I think it sort of depends on when they are getting ready to actually ship the thing, and what sort of date they have. But in terms of like when they announce it, you know, like the people that are like, I can't believe they haven't announced it yet. Like, what's the big competition that's eating their lunch? Nothing. It's not, they're in their own lane. It doesn't matter. There's nothing about the announcement of the Switch 2 that is going to be so powerful and power packed and relevant that, like, if it happens in January instead of March, that's going to matter. It's not like some device is going to come along in the next 90 days that is going to like, oh, I'm not getting a Switch now because I'm getting this. If that was the case, then people would have already done that. They would have already said, well, I'm just getting a Steam Deck. Fuck this. Like, I don't care. It's going to sell to people that want to play first-party Nintendo games, and there are quite a lot of those people. It's not going to, it's not going to be that big of a deal. The leaked shot of the dock, I think, if anything else, just kind of underscores this idea of like, there was a little bit of like, oh, we're hearing that there's power in the dock, which we went through this phase when the Switch 1 was getting ready to be announced. That was my big question when someone first told me about the Switch, was like, hey, is this thing going to be more powerful when it's docked? That was my question for the person who was kind of telling me about it. But that person didn't know. That person wasn't necessarily in the technical end of things, and so didn't really have a super clear look at the specs. It was like, and so the response I got was sort of I don't think so. And I think ultimately, the story on that is like, yeah, it kind of runs a little bit differently in the dock because it is scaling to a screen, and it is plugged into power as opposed to using battery, and so there's things they can do with the clock speed and whatever. But it wasn't like the dock itself had more capability in it. And seeing this leaked picture of the dock, it doesn't look like that they're cramming some eGPU into that thing. So I imagine that it's a similar situation. So Legion Arcade asks, do you think it'll be harder to find than the Wii when it first came out? I don't know. They've been locked in on this design for seemingly a really long time, and they've been manufacturing them for what sounds like quite a while, and one would assume that's because they want to make sure they have enough of them and not going to run into some weird supply chain thing. There's nothing about the Switch and presumably its follow-up. There's nothing about it that seems that exotic in terms of hard to source parts. And so one would expect that it would be a better situation than certainly the Wii was. But I would expect it would be a better situation than the first Switch was as well. So I don't know what the actual story there will end up being. Someone else asked like, oh, do you think it'll have the same form factor for cartridges? They have said that it will be backwards compatible, so presumably, it'll take the same cartridges. I don't think that there'll be a big change on that end. Maybe they do a different notch or something to prevent you from putting a Switch 2 game into a Switch 1, sort of like the Game Boy Color situation. But I don't really see it being too much more than that. So, yeah. Sorry, let's take one more quick break here. I just have to get up and handle something here that didn't get handled, that I thought got handled, and I need to handle that. And so I'm going to go handle that, and I will be right back in a sec. Okay. That's it for the news. Unless anything happened over the last little bit here. I don't think, CES being CES, I don't know, now that we're past the keynotes, there's maybe not too much left that's going to come out of there. So yeah. I've been thinking a lot about Game of the Year, and I've been writing stuff, and I'm still writing stuff that I will post to the Patreon over at patreon.com slash Jeff Gerstmann. I'm going to write something about kind of each of the, 10 or 15 games that kind of mattered to me in the year. It's not necessarily a top 10 list. But it's kind of the list of games that I've been thinking about. But I have been thinking about, like, what is the actual game of the year? And this has been a hard thing for me. And I don't have necessarily like a big reveal or a big awards presentation. But for me, this conversation comes down to two games, and I had to kind of play more of each of them to kind of, because it's always the problem when a really good game comes out very late in the year. You have this situation where you have to like kind of second guess yourself a little bit and go like, okay, is this game really that good? Or is this game just the best game that came out right now? And is it the best game? And so like a big part of my thought process has really boiled down to two games, and it's been UFO 50 and Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which is a really fucking wild comparison. It's a really interesting two games to 51 games to compare with each other. And so as I've played through more of Indy, it's an amazing video game. I think it's the game that I think I've been missing in terms of like, it almost feels like a throwback to the days when they made AAA games or something like this. It's a weird, because one of the big complaints I think people have had about the current generation of consoles has been this notion, and I think it's a ridiculous notion, but like I get the vibe of it resonates. That feeling of like, there aren't any games coming out on these consoles. What the hell is happening? And so Indiana Jones feels not only like a really good ass video game, but it feels like the video games that haven't been getting made at the big AAA level anymore. And it's weird that it's a first person game, but it works so well as a first person game. The performances are so great. The voice and the mannerisms of Indiana Jones are what you want them to be. Even though it isn't it's Harrison Ford's likeness, but like I think that stuff is so astoundingly well done. And the systems and things at play inside of Indiana Jones in terms of its like disguises and just like little bits, like those sorts of things are so good at giving the game additional depth. I think it would have been really easy for them to turn out a game that was a little more straightforward and a little less, like, again, these systems aren't deep. It's not Hitman levels of depth when it comes to its disguises and how all of that stuff works, but it's enough to give it more layers than it had before and to give you more options when it comes to solving puzzles. There's some stuff relatively early on where there's a kid who gets captured by the fascists and he's locked away kind of in a back corner of the map behind like 3 or 4 different buildings full of fucking bad guys, like little smallish buildings. But like you have to make your way through an area where you simply would have to be a fucking stealth kingpin to make it happen. And you can try that. And I got most of the way there before fucking up and getting caught and being like, oh man, I'm going to come back to this later. And then as you play through the rest of that area, the first kind of big area in the game, you eventually find a disguise that makes you look like the bad guys. You find a fascist outfit. And then you put that on, and at that point, you're there's only like a handful of people who can see through your disguise, And so there's still a little bit of stealth involved in that, but generally speaking, you can just walk back there and save that guy. And so it is not immersive sim levels of depth and choice to this sort of stuff, but it's enough of it to give you the feeling of having these sorts of options. And I think that they do a really great job of figuring out where to apply depth and where to just kind of give the illusion of depth, and systems that if you picked them apart, you'd be like, oh, this actually ain't all that. But in the context of the game and what they need to get out of it and what you as the player can get out of it, I think a lot of that particular stuff is just expertly done. And so for a while, that game was a lock. Like when I first started playing that game, and as I made my way through it, I'm like, this is absolutely the game of the year. And I had to sit down and be like, or is it just one of the best games of the year, but it's also the last game I played this year? And so I had to spend some time kind of going back and revisiting a lot of things. Now my list, you know, the list of games I've been generating is not, again, it's not a top 10 games list, because I think that would be a very weird, that'd be a much different list than the one I've compiled. But instead, it's a list of games that I found interesting in this calendar year, games that stood out in a variety of ways. And this is a list that's like gotten longer as time has gone on. Like I just added Deep Rock Galactic Survivor to it because I had forgotten about it. And I'm like, oh yeah, dude, I need to go back and play that because I bet they've added a ton of shit to it since it first came out. Hopefully, I mean, you know, I think they're still in early access. And so like this list has been growing and growing over time. But the first game I wrote on the list was UFO 50. Because I knew that was easily one of the best games, if not the best game, to come out in 2024. I think UFO 50 is amazing. I think it is this really touching tribute to a style of game development and an era of game development, sort of, that doesn't always get talked about, that doesn't always get picked apart the way that it maybe deserves. I think that UFO 50 is another game that, sort of like Indiana Jones, I think that everything in UFO 50 is done in service of exactly what that game needs. It doesn't feel like a game of wasted effort or wasted depth. I think that they applied their efforts in a very perfect way, if that makes any sense. And I think my favorite thing about UFO 50, and this is going to be slightly spoiler-y talk for UFO 50, when you're looking at the list of games in UFO 50, you see a through line. You see, because it is designed as a fictional list of a single company's output from, you know, whatever year to whatever other year, whatever range of years that this machine was relevant. The UFO 50, the machine, the LX, whatever it's called. And so you see concepts that start very early that get a sequel some years down the line, or you see elements of a game that might show up in another game. And so you see this weird through line through some of the games in the collection. And now that's very cool. But there is also the hidden game, the kind of unfinished game in UFO 50 that is a way more narrative focused thing that is this sort of autobiographical look at working for that company, made by one of the people who worked for this, again, this fictional company, kind of telling the story of working on games for that company and how miserable it was at the end. And so it also has these interesting things to say about a corporation and shitty managers that come in and fuck a thing up, and you're just Greg Milk trying to fucking make cool games. And you find the secrets, you find these snippets of unfinished game that has these different bits and pieces of this overall narrative of the game that is about the games. And so the way that is woven into the experience, and the through line of finding all of those pieces, involves you playing a lot of the normal games in UFO 50 and looking for very specific things. And so it's a story that kind of drags you back to the regular games, but then rewards you with these bits and pieces of a story and these bits and pieces of characters. And that ended up being very touching in a way that I didn't expect. And it feels like something, like they had something to say about the nature of game development and the nature of game development in a corporate environment. And it's not a big heavy-handed overall narrative. It is kind of a little cool bonus. But I found it to be incredibly touching as a companion piece to, what otherwise just seems like, hey, we made a bunch of games, we had a bunch of fake old games. Like, there's so much around the fake old games and so much thought, not only into just like what you would think of as like baseline, like, hey, we're going to make a fake computer, and so the color palette's going to be this, the sound capability is going to be this, and they try to find a range of things that make sense for the games they wanted to make. And I feel like that's job one, right? Of like, if you want to have a cohesive collection of fake old games that are all ostensibly running on the same hardware that also didn't exist, you have to kind of make those choices, right? And I think they make those choices incredibly well. It serves the early end of the games, the more simple games that they made, all the way through to the last game that the company made. And then to set that against this kind of like, this backdrop of this other kind of story that is being told in the fringes, in the margins, scribbled off to the side around the games, I think is incredible. And I think it's a very satisfying experience. Not every game in UFO 50 will like resonate with you as like, this is a banger, I need to play it 1 billion times, I need to do this. But every one of those games at least has ideas that are worth looking at and worth spending some time with. There are games in UFO 50 that I really loved. There are games in UFO 50 that I played a couple of times and went like, okay, yeah, all right. I can appreciate what this is going for, and this is a neat idea, and it's neat that it fits into this overall narrative of the output of this company. And so for me, the year comes down to those two games. That's it. There's nothing else. Nothing else came close. And so I had to sit there with that for a good long time and go like, well, hell, man. Is UFO 50 better than Indiana Jones, or is Indiana Jones better than UFO 50? It's a really, again, you can see it. It's a very strange conversation to have with yourself. But I fall on the side of UFO 50. UFO 50 is the game of the year. There's 50 of them in there. How can you go wrong? I think UFO 50 is endlessly impressive. I think it's an incredible thing. I don't think we'll see anything like it. Someone wrote in, and I think it was last week, someone wrote in and said, oh, what if they did a 16-bit Super UFO 50 and they did this? And And I think that would be amazing. First off, that would be amazing if there was some kind of follow-up to that thing. But I think that narratively speaking, with what the story that UFO 50 tells, I think that kind of doesn't make quite as much sense as you would think. And also the level of complexity that you expect out of a 16-bit game makes it very hard to make a 50-game collection of those games. One of the best things about UFO 50 is that an individual play of each one of those games might not take you that much time. You could spend 100 hours with some of those games, but you could also spend 45 seconds with them and lose and go, oh shit, I need to try again. Or, oh, I need to save this, or I need to, save here and come back to it, or whatever. And I think when you step forward even a handful of years in their kind of artificial timeline, I think the level of complexity of game that you would expect out of a quote unquote 16-bit version of that game would be much harder for a team to produce. And the expectations of what those games were and what they were capable of and their overall length and everything would be very hard. I think if you were to do 16-bit games, you would end up with a bunch of overly short 16-bit games that you would go like, oh, they had an idea here, but they didn't flesh it out into like what I think of as a full SNES game or whatever, right? This doesn't feel like a real Genesis game. This doesn't feel like a real 16-bit game. And so you would have these kind of like unfinished thoughts as opposed to fully realized and fully developed video games. And that is one of the most impressive things about UFO 50, is that every one of those games, even if some of them don't necessarily have much more to them than their initial idea, they still feel like fully fledged games because they chose an era to replicate where you could get away with that, because that's what gaming often was at the time. Computer games of the 80s and like you ended up with some that are just like, here's a single screen game and here's a 5-hour adventure. You just a wide variety. And so I think I find that to just be endlessly impressive. And UFO 50 is something that I have spent a lot of time thinking about. Stuff like Campanella. Just like but even like Barbuda, like with the game that like everyone kind of writes off as just like, oh, there's like, it is so full of fucking crazy shit. In a way that there were games of that era that were that way. And I think a lot of that stuff is just super impressive, man. Night Manor's really neat. Cyber Owls is like fascinating as a cap on it all, as a narrative, especially when you think about Miasma Tower and the kind of the overall narrative behind all the games. Cyber Owls takes on this additional level of melancholy, I guess, as the last game in the collection. I loved Pilot Quest probably more than most. Stuff like pin golf is really cool, just conceptually. Party House is really fun. Everyone loves Mortal and Mortal 2. And yeah, I don't know. There's so much in UFO 50 that I think is so it is just this endlessly fascinating. Like everywhere you look, there's something that you just go like, wow, man, I can't believe that this is here. That was my experience going from game to game initially. Was like, I can't believe that something like Onion Delivery is in here. That there's a game that feels like this, and they nailed the feel of this, and then you play something like Warp Tank, which I think Warp Tank is amazing. I would play a full-fledged separate release. Like if you took the concept of Warp Tank and lightly iterated on it and put it out as a separate modern indie game, oh man, Warp Tank is good. And everyone's, I think, I think a lot of the conversation has gravitated to a smaller handful of the games, but I do think that there's a lot of interesting conversation that has happened since this game's release about all of the games. And that's maybe the most impressive thing. I think it would be easy for this to just be like, oh, well, there's like 5 good ones and the rest of them are just like, oh, haha, that's funny. But like, no, like they don't play it for laughs. They don't play it for like, oh, here's a goofy thing. Like they really spent time making sure that each one of these ideas at least had enough going on to make it work, as a part of this collection. And also a lot of them are fucking damn good. Like, I don't, I'm looking over the list. I'm trying to think like, what's a bad game on this list? And I don't know that I have a good answer to that question. Like, I don't necessarily love like Quibble Race. Like it's well made for what it is. It's not my favorite game on the list, but it's done well. So it's a really, UFO 50 feels like a very rare thing and a very special thing. And I feel like it comes from a place of not just a love for games and game design at a level that I would never be able to accomplish. It's not just some nostalgia piece. It is like these games work on their own, and I think that is a part that I think the part that has to be understood by people who have not played this, or people that look at it and kind of side eye it a little bit, which I think is very easy to do. Is I think it's very easy to misunderstand just how well made or how well thought out so many of these ideas are, and how many of them like punch above their weight, hit like the average game is so good. It's this crazy experience of like, well, that's my favorite game, and then you play 2 more games and you're like, well, that's my favorite game now. And like your first time through the games for me was this experience of like, I can't believe there's something better than this thing I just played 10 minutes. You think you found the flagship game. You think you found like, oh, this is the one game that they put all their time into, and all these other games are neat, but like this is the game. And then like you play 3 more and you're like, oh no, this is the one. And so you come away from the collection feeling like all of these games have so much more going on than you initially thought, and that there's a level of depth here that it almost doesn't deserve in some ways. You would expect it to be. You would expect some corners to be cut. But instead, what you see is, oh my God, this is why this game took forever to make. Because they fucking made it. They really sat down and they made it. They did not cut corners on it and say, well, we're going to make 10 really good ones, and then the rest, here's some, I don't know, 45 through 50, which is like, here's this thing. And maybe on the development end, that's how it went. I mean, it's entirely possible, right? But like they paper over that. If that's the case, they paper over it incredibly well. And UFO 50 is, you just don't see a lot of releases like this that have this level of care applied to such a huge surface area. So much. There's so much in here, obviously, right? And so I think that's the magic of UFO 50. There is a lot of magic in UFO 50. Whether it's the games themselves or kind of that meta narrative that exists alongside it. I think that stuff is just it's truly mind blowing. It's truly mind blowing. And so that's, you know, that's why UFO 50 is the game of the year. Indiana Jones came damn close. It's again a weird conversation to have, and it is, for a while it felt like a coin toss between the two games. But UFO 50 is truly special. And there's a lot to love there. I highly recommend it. I also recommend Indiana Jones and you know, and also, you know, hey, you should play Mini Shoot Adventures and you should check out Arctic Eggs. Like it's not just a 2-game year. I don't mean for this to sound like every other game was shit or whatever. Like, I've got a long list of like really, like, Thank Goodness You're Here is an amazing game for what it is. It's a little, you know, it's short. It's a fun. You could say it's a little slight. You could say, you know, but like, I think that's a tremendous experience. Tekken 8, great game. Really good year for Call of Duty. Star Wars Outlaws, hell of a fucking video game. I mean, Click Holding came out this year. It's a good year for games. So that's where I've ended up on that. And I'll have a little bit more to say about some of these games. Ironically, instead of writing about one of my favorite games of the year, I wrote about one of the games I played the most. And so the only one of these write-ups that is actually done is The First Descent. And the only game I've been playing for the past like week and a half is fucking Warframe. Ugh. Like I said last week, I understand Warframe now in a way that I never did before. And I've just got to unlock Uranus, and then I've got to play missions there until I see drones. And then that'll unlock the next story quest. I think that seems to be the implication. It seems to be what the game is telling me. I reached like mastery level 8. I don't know. I've got so many unleveled frames and guns and all this other stuff that I don't know what my mastery level will be like once I'm finished with that. But they level up so quickly that, like, as I'm grinding out through these missions on my way to Uranus, that like I'm like, I keep leveling up all of this stuff along the way, and so I'm changing out guns and I'm changing out powers and I'm changing out all of this other stuff along the way in ways that actually kind of freshen up the gameplay, because you get different abilities and all this other stuff too. And yeah, it's interesting, but also it's not all good. I finished what is it? The Duviri Paradox, which is the roguelite open area story thing that I think they added. I don't know when they added it, a few years ago probably. And I had to finish that to check that off the list, because you need to finish that on your way to do the thing that I'm trying to do. And I had played through like almost all of it several months ago, when I was trying it out, and it's not good. It's like it's a super bad, like, it sounds like that once you finish the story part of it and you can then come back to it and use it to grind out new characters or new frames in a way that, like, you know, you weren't able to before. And so for that reason, it seems like people like certain aspects of it. But as a like story, like the every time they write narrative in Warframe, at least what I've seen so far, which has been a handful of side quests and this paradox thing and some of the other stuff, that It is just a bunch of bullshit. They put a bunch of, like, they write a bunch of nonsense, and sometimes it is relatively charming nonsense. I had to go to a planet where a bunch of plant people had been overrun by some kind of infection, some kind of spores, whatever it is. And so you're talking to Mother, who's an infected plant person, and then you must go find Father, and then you have to go find brother and sister, and they're fighting, and all this whole family is fighting. And so this is this little story about a family that can't get along, but at the end they pull together to save the planet, with you doing all the trigger pulling in the middle of all of it. And it's like, it's not an especially well told story, but in the context of this wide, sprawling fucking nonsense, like, all of that stuff it's ridiculous. And you encounter all these little pockets of ridiculous little stories as you are flipping out and shooting things in the face for hundreds of hours. And that's Warframe. It's interesting. And it sounds like the roguelite, the story in that thing sounds like it is actually a key part of the big story reveals at the very end. And so if you haven't done that, none of that will make any sense. And, like, it's just it's a real it's a fascinating thing, especially coming to it all these years later after they have iterated on it and done so many things to it and everything else. It's become a very strange thing. Why don't we get into some emails? podcast@guard.bike is the email address. You can send in your emails to me, and I'll read them. Mine above it. One of the top stories on The Verge right now. This is CES. I don't even think this is CES news, but it's telling that this is one of the top stories on The Verge right now is the best budget robot vacuums. Dude, fuck tech. Fucking fuck tech, dude. Let's see here what folks sent in to podcast @guard.bike. Grant writes in and says, I feel like the time for the Switch 2 is over. I got news for you, Grant. They haven't even announced it yet. And it's going to do fine. But okay, well, let's hear you out. Is anyone really excited for a locked down handheld after all that is going on in the PC space, especially now that Steam Deck OS is being opened up to more powerful handhelds? Nintendo's first party has been lagging for years. They were only initially propped up by Wii U ports and remasters of old games. I look at my Switch and realize Nintendo cannot carry a dedicated system anymore. It's all B games of Nintendo properties from third-party studios, the worst version of third-party games, Wii U ports, remakes, and the actual AAA Nintendo games that are sprinkled so few and far between that I have about 5 games for my Switch since 2017. I just think why when I look at the possibility of a Switch 2. The freedom of the Steam Deck has made me rethink the whole handheld space. Why I think Microsoft and Sony will be unwise to jump in. What will be the point of competing with Valve? They'll lose badly, as they have even less to offer than Nintendo. The people in the market for a Switch are smart enough to use a Steam Deck. Children are not that stupid. They work things out quite well. I honestly think it could flop for being too similar in a market that has exploded. This is a time where Nintendo needs a new gimmick to excite. Grant, you are 1,000% wrong. Most of the people who own a Switch and most of the people who will consider buying a Switch 2 probably don't even know that the Steam Deck exists, because it's not there yet. It's just not there yet. Now, in certain spaces, in the circles that I think that you and I probably run in online, it's a very different story, right? Because people have the conversations like that. People have conversations like, Why would I want a locked down, closed system, man, when I could get a Steam Deck and do everything? Meanwhile, yes, this person in the middle of Europe says the Steam Deck is not even available to buy in my country. So yeah, I mean, Valve's efforts are incredibly awesome and valuable, but ultimately relatively nascent in the grand scheme. Even these announcements of like the Z2 chip and some of these additional devices coming from Lenovo and Acer, with eventually more manufacturers to follow, I think that space is going to matter, and it is going to get better fast, and it will eventually be a bigger deal. But no, people will buy one of those because they bought the previous one and because they want to play those games on them. And it will be relatively inexpensive, especially probably compared to some of these other devices. The Steam Deck is still, you can get the cheapest Steam Deck, refurbed, whatever, for, a price that is maybe within a more of a mainstream range. But ultimately, the Switch 2 is going to be aiming at a much wider audience. And so they're willing to cut corners in a way that, will appeal to that crowd. That's not going to necessarily like, oh, well, it doesn't have variable refresh rate. And so it's not, it doesn't have this, it doesn't have that. Like, dude, it's got Mario Kart 9. Like that's going to be one of the things that sells this. It's going to sell in a worldwide market. They're going to sell them in as many territories as they possibly can. It's going to be selling some of the most beloved franchises in all of gaming. And while I'm with you that maybe some of those games have been few and far between lately, one would assume that's because developers have been spending a little bit of time on making games for the new thing lately. So I would expect we would see some big guns, maybe, not all of them right at launch, but over the course of that system's lifespan, I would think that Nintendo will do just fine at bringing out a variety of games. I would actually like them to do better at selling smaller games on this one and generating more games that kind of fit that handheld aesthetic, as opposed to making big console games or whatever. But yeah, most people don't care about closed ecosystem versus open ecosystem. They care about characters, they care about franchises, they care about the games themselves, and in some cases they care about the thing that their kid wants. In a lot of situations, like, and it's funny because I think if you picked this apart, like, there are aspects of what you're saying that do apply. Like, there are a lot of people who are going to play Fortnite on a Switch. A lot of kids that are already primarily playing Fortnite on a Switch. And yeah, there are better ways to play Fortnite, but that's the one they have. And they're more likely to get a follow-up to that thing because it will still play all of the family-friendly Nintendo games that their family wants and loves to play, as opposed to going out of their way to go like, well, if we get the Lenovo Legion Go that's running Windows, then I can download the Epic Store and I can install Fortnite on it that way, and it might run okay there. We'll see. As opposed to a version that's been extremely well optimized specifically for the Switch hardware. Well, extremely well optimized is maybe a bit of a stretch, but optimized. So yeah, I tend to think that there should be more going on with a piece of Nintendo hardware than the stuff that we've seen so far. I think everything that has been leaked or kind of maybe not even leaked, but the people that are inferring certain things out of some of the Joy-Con shots and whatnot. I think that some of that stuff is a little underwhelming. And so I think the idea that they're just going to make another one of those things, I think, is actually kind of a bummer in a weird way, because one of the coolest things that Nintendo has done over the last, let's say, 20 years is that they've been willing to get weird. The Wii proved that they were willing to get weird, that they were willing to throw out so much of what we think of as like common functionality in favor of the motion controller. And the Switch, you know, they try to have it both ways. You can take the things off and waggle them around. It sucks. You can do it. It sucks though. But the Switch is ultimately, you know, standard controls. Here's some analog, you know, and these ones look like the new one seems like they're going to go with more analog triggers on it as opposed to just individual buttons. And you know, they'll do their thing. And I think that's a little less exciting, but maybe a little bit more exciting for third parties who just want to know, like, hey, we're making games around this controller concept on every other platform. So if you go too weird with controls and make us have to fucking adapt our games to this thing, we're just not going to do it. And so I'm sure that there are third parties that are happy that it's not getting too weird. But I don't know. There's a certain aspect of the idea of them following up the Switch with another one of those that I think is I don't know, not as cool and as weird as I would have hoped. But I think you're crazy. Ultimately, I think your read on this space is crazy. The PC end of it has not gotten as big as you think it is. It is something that I think will continue to matter and will continue to grow. But no one is looking at the Steam Deck and the sales numbers of any of these devices and going, oh man, they're putting Nintendo on notice. Like, no, dude. It's such a specific subset of a subset that want these things right now. That even know they exist, really. That when you think about worldwide, like, no, it's not. They are not yet in a position to take it to the Switch. Give it another 10 years or something, and maybe it'll be a different story, but no. Mason in Virginia writes in and says, and asks, are games becoming disposable? To which I would just stop and say, yeah, kind of. Yeah, sure. Yes. Wrong camera. Hello. I want to start by saying I hate Game Pass and all it stands for. I know that's hyperbolic, but I feel the Netflix for gaming ruins games as an art form and makes them feel disposable, as they are seen as, you get the game for free, now beat it as fast as possible and move on to the next form of content. My question is, am I being paranoid, or are games feeling more disposable? Mason, I would say you're right for the wrong reason, because what you're describing is how game rental started in the 80s, when we were renting 8-bit Nintendo games and attempting to finish them as quickly as possible because we had to rent another game, or because we had to return it, at the end of the weekend. And so you're like, well, I've got 2 days to get through this thing. I better fucking get going. And so in some ways, it was always like that. If you would like to become a good game reviewer, I might recommend going back to the 80s and renting as many games as you can and trying to finish them as quickly as possible, because that's a good skill to have when it comes to reviewing video games. But as far as games feeling more disposable, sure. But I don't think it's Game Pass that's doing that. I think it's games that require server connections and games that are getting shut off all the time. They just shut off not last year's WWE game, but the game from the year before that. So the 2023 release of WWE just had its servers shut off yesterday after less than 2 years on shelves. And so a wide swath of functionality in that game is now just gone. That is disposable. It's not the consumers that are disposing of the games. It is the publishers that are treating the games as hyper disposable. Sometimes that's for business reasons. I mean, almost always that's for business reasons. Forza doesn't keep its car licenses forever, and so eventually they have to stop selling Forza Horizon, though the Forza Horizon 3 servers I guess, were offline for a little bit, and they just rebooted them and brought them back up. It was not an intended outage, I suppose. But ultimately, it's, like, there are a lot of games coming out right now, particularly in the free-to-play space. I would say The First Descendant is one of them. As something of an expert on The First Descendant, let me tell you, that game is meant to fucking leave your brain the minute you stop playing it, and eventually they are going to shut that fucking thing down, and no one will remember it existed. Much like I am the only person in the history of the universe that will ever say the sentence, that free-to-play Ghost in the Shell shooter they brought out, the game was all right. Because I am the only person left who will remember it. Because it was forgettable when it was out. And so I think that we have this large, especially as more and more games are coming out all the time, I think it's very easy for games to be forgettable and very easy for us to move on from games that then fail as a business. I think we have a lot of companies that want games to reach a certain level of success and maintain that level of success forever. If they can have it that way, they would love to have it that way. Everyone would have loved to have made their own Fortnite somewhere along the way, their own Counter-Strike, whatever it is. They would love to have a piece of that action for 20 years. But most games are not going to crack through and become one of those games. And when you fail at that, you fail hard. And so the game disappears and it's gone. And so I think that we have it's not every game, but there is a large class of games that are being treated as completely disposable. And there was something about, I think it was out of an earnings call or something, but Nexon, it sounds like, well, no, it was not an earnings call, but there was a report basically saying like, hey, a lot of Nexon's games are underperforming and they're going to have to figure something out when it comes to that stuff. And The First Descendant was, one of those games. And, they'll pull the plug on all those games. There's no investment. There's no artistic investment on their behalf in terms of like, well, we've got to keep this game up and running because we believe in it. We're going to launch this thing. We believe that this will make us money. And if it doesn't, we are firing everyone or rolling them onto a different product. And we are going to pull the plug on this game and try again. Because that's the type of game we make. And eventually we'll break through and have another big smash success. And then sometimes they have that smash success and they get years of amazing money coming in. And then that whole team resigns and goes and does something else. And then they're like, oh shit. And their game falls off. Like not everything lasts forever. And so even the games that seemed like they were widely successful might fall off. And so I think you have a lot of companies that are treating games as completely disposable. And it is these games that are, whether they are connected to a live service or they are connected or, some large chunk of them is connected to an online server. In the case of the WWE games, it's like community creations. It's like you can make your own characters and upload them to a server and share them with other people. And I think there's something about the idea of those servers going away that I find incredibly distasteful. Like, hey, we got a server where you can share things that you, the user, made with other people. And now we're going to wipe it all. Fucking whatever. Hope you saved it. Hope you have it on your local hard drive because fuck off. We don't care about it. That thing you made, whatever. Little Big Planet, similar deal, Mario Maker. Servers full and full and full of thousands and thousands and thousands of user-created levels and user-created characters and all of this other stuff. That they just go like, yeah, I don't know. It's not worth it for us to continue to pay to keep this thing up and running. So, and we would love for you to buy the new game. So fuck off. I think that's gross. And I get it from a business perspective. The argument on the other side of it is like, well, if more people used it, we might have kept it up. Not in the case of WWE because that's an annual game. So they always want to shunt you to the new one. But in cases like a Little Big Planet, especially where it was like, oh, it's maybe not worth the money for us to fix this game that is being fucked up by hackers. Like, not enough people play it to bother. And, you know, Dreams is going to go through something eventually down the line, right? So yeah, I don't know. I look at that as something, as a case of like, yeah, there are definitely aspects of gaming that are treated as disposable, but it has nothing to do with Game Pass, and it has nothing to do with the idea of getting through a game as quickly as possible and moving on to the next thing and all of that stuff. It's more just that's the business plan, you know? Andy writes in and says, I've been playing some Star Wars Outlaws over the holidays, and that game seems fine. I do, however, get annoyed with the blaster. Blasters in Star Wars have always been a quick kill device, and watching stormtroopers, pirates, and others take multiple blasts and just kind of jitter in front of me as I shoot them seems super dumb. I get that it's a video game, but I kind of hate it. Man, yeah. Star Wars blasters. If you think Star Wars blasters are being misrepresented, you should try fucking lightsabers on for size. Lightsabers used to cut through fucking doors, dude. Cutting motherfuckers' arms off, and then suddenly you are getting in fights where you're hitting dudes with a laser sword multiple times, and it's not bisecting them into, yeah, yes. You're right. Video games, the video games do terrible things for balance reasons. And that's just how it goes. I think we accept that. I think that, you could try to base your entire game design around the idea of, hey, what if we made this thing the way that it was in the movie, this super overpowerful, crazy thing? But then you probably have to come up with a bunch of narrative reasons as to why you don't have that item for much of the game. Like, oh, you lose your lightsaber. You found it in this one area that looks a little worse than all the other areas, but you can cut it into a million little pieces. You can cut through the doors in this one area, and then that disappeared. It's like the Hammer of Dawn in Gears of War. They're like, here's one sequence where, for narrative reasons, we're going to give you access to this insane gun, and then it's cloudy. Come on, stupid clouds. Video games, man. They're gonna be video games. They've always been video games. They will never not be video games. They are balancing for video game reasons, not for cool narrative reasons. And so all of this one-shot kill, I mean, you should see what a gun does to somebody when you shoot them in the head with it. In fact, don't. You can see that online, but I'm going to advise you to maybe not go seek that out. But hey, any game in which you shoot someone in the head twice to drop them is fucking ridiculous. It's like just, but that's video games. David from York in the United Kingdom sent a list in that I thought was interesting. It's a list of the top ranked adult only games released on Steam in 2024. And I thought that it might, you might just be interested in these games and what their user ranking are. So I'm trying to think like what would be a good, here's the top 50, starting at number 50 and counting down all the way to number 1. Here's the top 50 adults only games on Steam by user rating, according to steamdb.info. Last Hope, Hard Coded, Where the Heart Is, Season 1, Ex-Angels, Chronicles of Delights, Isekai Adventure, Femboy Aim Trainer, PMC Promiscuity, Churn Vector, Forbidden Fantasy, Steps of Debauchery, Hypnosis Card 2, Happy Life, Half Demon Shinobi, Catgirl Aim Trainer, Bear Witness, Saki and the Crucible of Debauchery, Guardians of Eden, Embrace of the Forest, Malcatraz Maiden, Yuri Sword Saga, Falling with Ice Phoenix, Nightly Passions, Visca's Earth Conquest, Realms of Bondage, My Proud Girlfriend, Lena Chapter, Having a Hard Time, a game whose title is seemingly entirely in Japanese except for the word remake in it, is at number 26. Spirit Valley, Furry Aim Trainer, Third Crisis, Summer's Gone, Season 1, Bunny Garden, Amarillo's Butt Slapper, Chasing Sunsets, Benefit Ship, Hole Dweller, Dusk Pub, Adult Only, Wings of Seduction, Bust 'em Out, Romantic Escapades, City Lights Love Bites, Season 0, Pilot Season, Inari, In Heat, Lustful Nights, Desert Stalker, Aurelia, Apprehending the Adventurer Chan, Live 2D Tentacles Simulator, Obscura, Working Sakuya, Love Sucks, Night 2, Mad Island, Humans Are Not That Against Lizard Women, Kaiju Princess 2, and at number 1, Summer Clover. It's got a 94% rating. There you have it. Thanks to David for sending in this list. Hamza in Texas writes in and says, there's an article floating around this week that discusses how the introduction to and discussion of video games has been gentrified. And this is a link to a Medium article that talks about how there are games created around the world that are, you know, not really discussed in a Western, in an American context. Specifically, like, Free Fire is mentioned as one of those games. But just a variety of games that were developed in Taiwan that, you maybe have never heard of here. Anyway, I'm not going to read the whole article here. It's on Medium. You can go find it. Even as first-gen Americans, my introduction to video games was a stereotypical Western one. This is what Hamza wrote in. We got a giant plastic box with an N64 and Mario 64 from Sam's Club for my brother's birthday. This article was eye-opening in how it pointed out that the gaming experience for so many other people in the world is very different from ours. My question for you is your curation of news and discussion-worthy topics, how has what you talk about changed over the years regarding gaming in other parts of the world? Has it become more relevant? Will it remain less relevant given a mostly American audience? Obviously, we talk about the MiHoYo games and Wukong now, but as the article points out, there has been so much more before. So I would say that historically, what has happened is you have seen different publications pop up to serve different markets regionally. And so GameSpot, even though it is the World Wide Web, GameSpot was focused on the market in the US. When it came time to cover games in the UK, they launched GameSpot UK. And GameSpot UK had a different staff, and it would use some of our reviews, but they would write some of their own reviews, mainly for FIFA, because they felt that we didn't cover soccer well enough or whatever. And there was GameSpot Japan. And so, we would license out the name. Some of them were owned and operated by the same company that owned GameSpot. And some of them, like, I think GameSpot Japan was a licensing deal. IGN is the same thing. IGN has a ton of regional, fewer than they used to. I think everyone has fewer than they used to. But there are regional variety, regional versions of these publications. Kotaku used to have Kotaku Australia and some of this other stuff. And so you focus you focus on games that are in the territory where you are based. And a lot of that was around game release dates and such, because games would release much later in Europe than they would in the US. And so it was this weird situation. And I suspect a lot of it was done for fucking ad dollars. Because everything always is, right? But it was a thing of like, well, if games are coming out later in the UK, if you make a version of the site for the United Kingdom that is focusing on those games when they're coming out there, then that will matter more for that region than the US coverage will. And then you can sell ads on that regional coverage based around the UK launch of a game because you're marketing it to the UK audience for whom that game is brand new. And that's how it was, you know, for years and years and years. You know, Famitsu is focused on the Japanese market. EGM was focused on the US market. And they would have an occasional, like, here's what's going on in EGM. It was primarily focused on Japan because it was really focused on, hey, there's something here that's out that is going to come out here next year, but we're going to give you the earliest word we can on it. And so import coverage was the only real reason you would see people go out of region for that style of coverage. Obviously, nowadays, things are different in a handful of ways where we see game development happening in more parts of the world. But what you're talking about with like Black Myth Wukong or the MiHoYo games getting coverage, it's because they are out and playable in the United States in a very easy way. A game like Free Fire, I believe, is on phones here now, but for a while was not. And a game like Crossfire, who they eventually did Crossfire X for that one, right? I think you had a situation there where like that game was literally not playable in the United States. And so in a lot of these situations you're discussing, and a lot of the situations that kind of get discussed in the Medium article, it is games that were not widely available here in the United States. And so there were not good ways for them to be covered here. And also because it was extremely product-focused coverage, there were very few reasons to cover it. Like, hey, here's a game you're never going to get to play. Congratulations. Go ahead and read about it. Like, that's interesting up to a point as a feature. But maybe that's one thing you do, you know, you do that once a year. You go like, games they don't want you to play, you know, however you frame it. And now we're kind of on the other side of region locking and a lot of that stuff. It doesn't happen nearly as much as it used to. But yeah, you know, there are still games that come out in the world, but like, I guess I would say that like, yeah, there are probably interesting games coming out all over the world all the time, but there are also games coming out everywhere all the time. And so there's already more games than there is time. And so are you going to focus on a game that is maybe only available in Chinese that I would not be able to play? I jumped through a lot of hoops to play the first free-to-play Call of Duty that they did when it only was out in China. I signed up for a fucking QQ account and all of this other fucking weird shit. And VPNs and all of that stuff to try to take a look at that. And it was a gigantic hassle that was fascinating, but was only interesting because it was an alternate Call of Duty product. And so, by and large, there's just not a lot of user interest in a game like Free Fire, which can be one of the biggest games in the world, but no one here has heard of it because no one here cares. PUBG, the mobile version, is apparently, at times, has been the biggest game in the world over the last 5-ish years or whatever it was. But for a good long time, that version of the game was not available in the US. I don't know if that specific version of the game is available in the States. I'm fairly certain that there is a PUBG in the App Store right now, but I'm not sure if it's the same game, same licenses, same whatever. And so, you know, there's all of these sort of weird situations where, like, just because of regionality, some of these games are not available anymore, even if they may be like, hey, this is the biggest game in India. Like, okay. How do I play it here? Well, you kind of don't. All right. So I think a big part of it, like, I don't think it, like, I guess the other thing I would say is arguing that games have been gentrified would, I think, require them to have never not been, you know, like we go all the way back to the origins of gaming, we're talking about Atari in California. We're talking about a lot of these things coming out of America and then Japan, and then Japanese games getting localized for the American market. And for the longest time, that is exactly how it went. Europe obviously went down its own path with computer games and different developers making things there. And because of the lack of a language barrier, those games started to see some success here in the West. But I think for a variety of language barriers and regional restrictions and all of that sort of stuff, a lot of those games are just, not on anyone's radar because they're not available here. And so they're just not a part of that conversation. And there's not a great incentive to go to find that stuff unless that is specifically your beat. So I would say if you think that there's a real lack of coverage when it comes to those sorts of games, go cover them. Start a blog specifically devoted to like Western coverage of Eastern games, of games in whatever region you choose. That was something when one Drew Scanlon set out on his journeys around the world to kind of get a look at what the different gaming scenes were in different parts of the world with Cloth Map. I think he made some content that was very eye-opening when it comes to how people encountered video games in different parts of the world. It's sort of a different type of conversation. But it is kind of the other side of the same coin. And so I would say if you think that there's a vacuum there, fill it. Ultimately, that's, people always ask, like, how do I get started in this business? What do I do? How do I do that? Like, identify a vacuum and fill it with content. If you think that stuff doesn't exist the same way or the way that you want to see it, start making it. It's, I don't, is there an amazing large audience for that sort of stuff? Maybe, I don't know. But I don't know that I would call it gentrification so much as I would say like, yeah, no, over the years, people make games everywhere in the world now. It's not just, these kind of big territories. Like, of course they are. Of course, you could go ask consultants and people that are working with teams all over the world. Rami's a great example of this. He's consulting with teams in all kinds of parts of the world that I never would have expected were making games. And he's talking about that sort of stuff here and there. As part of his work. And so, yeah, I think that, but ultimately I think a lot of those teams have the goal of trying to get their game published, and available in these major territories. And so that would mean publishing your game in English and all of that sort of stuff. And so I think, yeah, if you've got a game that, doesn't exist in English or another language, yeah, I think you've made something that's a very uphill battle for people to try to cover. And, but also I think, we're a lot of these games that like Free Fire is called out specifically in the Medium article. And that was one I always just look at and go like, yeah, man, I don't know. Like I'm interested in the idea that Free Fire is this massive sensation in some parts of the world. And for a while there, they had an American team devoted to PR for that game, and they were trying to get it go. They were trying to make a name for it in the States and trying to get it to catch on, and it didn't because there are other games here that have already filled those slots. Like you see a lot of these games, these shooters, the competitive shooters in particular, that are suddenly like this massive thing in China or whatever, and you're like, what's it, Crossfire? What the? And you look at it and go like, this is like fucking, okay, so you made bootleg Counter-Strike and it's the biggest game in the world? Okay. Here we play Counter-Strike, so good luck with that. I don't know. We have the actual thing here. You have actual Counter-Strike, but it's only licensed through specific net cafes and wherever else people can get it, and so it's not as available, and so you filled the gap with another game in this region. Cool. Like, there's something interesting about that. Like, I find that fascinating, but you know what I mean? It was no shock that when they tried to make a consoleized Crossfire game that they could ship worldwide, that no one gave a fuck. The Crossfire name had zero resonance here in the States. They ran that beta for a long time, and it was cool that you could push a button for tactical growth, but that game was ass. It shut down for a reason. It's a shame that the first of the single player stuff that Remedy worked on, of all things, also got shut down in the wake of that. But that stuff was not very good either. So yeah, I don't know. Like, you're right, I guess, but also I think that that stuff has been very challenging to cover, and there is not a lot of interest in the audiences that are here in these parts of the world to do like ongoing Free Fire coverage. That would be, or ongoing coverage of games from these parts of the world. That would be something in a classical sense. If you were on a big website, you would run a feature that says games from around the world, and you'd be like, in Taiwan they made this, and you would look at it and go, wow, in Germany they made this, and you would do your sort of very shallow look at like these games from other parts of the world. But no one runs features like that anymore. So I don't know who is left to do even that these days. Let's do one more email. Schumann writes in and says, I've been playing a lot of that new Mario Party game lately with my wife and sister-in-law. All right. Quality of the game notwithstanding, I was a little surprised to learn that the game lets you choose a lot of minor characters like Goomba, Spike from Mario 3, and even a freaking Ninja. I only played the older games before, so I don't know if this is a new thing for them or not. But it got me thinking, have there really been no new Mario characters since the late 80s and early 90s that might make for a better roster than having Monty Mole and a regular Koopa Troopa in them? Rosalina is the only one I can think of, and that feels like a long time ago already too. What's going on at Nintendo that they've stopped adding characters to the Mario universe? Yeah, as I was reading this email, I stopped and thought like, yeah, who was it? I was like, oh, and Rosalina was the one I came to. I was like, is Rosalina the last like major new character, or is it like Waluigi? Yeah, Bowser Jr. is relatively new-ish. They brought back Pauline, yeah, but Pauline is, original Donkey Kong. But like, yeah, who is her? Nabbit? Is Nabbit the last? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Rosalina was 18 years ago. Yeah, you're not wrong, but I guess I would also say there's a lot of characters. There's enough characters to where if you were making a roster for a racing game or a party game or a tennis game or whatever, you've got enough. And you've got enough in different body sizes to do the like, well, Wario is big, so he's slow, but he's powerful. Waluigi, he's lanky, so he's faster, but not as powerful. Like you've got the ice hockey level of variance. I think it's interesting that they would put a scumbag like Monty Mole in a video game, but I think that's just the type of game Mario Party is, right? No morals, absolute scum, top to bottom. So I guess I'm not shocked. But yeah, you're not wrong that they have not added characters to the Mario universe in a major way for a good long time. But I guess I would also say, what do you need? Wart is underused. There are characters that they don't use that they could use. They could put Birdo in more things if you want to consider Birdo part of the Mario universe. But if they're going to separate out, like the stuff that they pulled from Mario 2 USA is a weird. It's a weird list of like, yeah, Ninja and a couple of other small things made about. No one is talking about Claw Grip or Mouser or anything these days. No one's talking about Sniffits. Sniffits you get from they often label it. They label Sniffits like it's like a head cleaner for a VCR. But don't fall for that. It is not meant to clean your VCR. It is meant to clean out an entirely different part of you. So don't mess that one up if you're out there shopping for Sniffits. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's my point. My answer to that question is they don't need to invent any new Mario characters because they have more than enough for any roster for any type of Mario universe game they're going to make. Because they've already covered all the different body types and such. that unless there's a narrative reason to introduce a new character in a mainline Mario game, the way that like a Rosalina or something like that came along, there are not a lot of great ways to, not a lot of great reasons to introduce new characters. And so I think it's more that they have them already. They have everything they need. And so why reinvent the wheel when they already have time-tested, well-liked characters with a lot of disgusting fan art out there to already pull from? You can already find pictures of Waluigi's feet on the internet. They don't need to invent like a new character. Like people don't need a new character, so they have to draw new feet and all this other stuff. Like it's already out there. Stick with Waluigi. Stick with what you know. That's going to do it for the show. Thanks everybody for listening. And I'll be back tomorrow to, I don't know, we'll play some video games. We'll figure some stuff out. And then Friday we will rank some 8-bit Nintendo games like we do. So come on back to check that stuff out. I may have solved some parts of the upload problem. We'll find out as soon as I hit stop on this video here for the podcast if I have truly solved the issue or not. I streamed some stuff over the weekend as I've been trying to solve some of these weird publishing issues on YouTube, and that resulted in me playing a bunch of Inca for the CDI and then a bunch of Inca 2, the sequel to Inca, which was out for DOS the following year. Inca 2 is really something special. Head over to that YouTube channel and fucking punch the bell or whatever and watch some Inca 2. That's going to do it. I will see you here on the podcast next week. Have a good one.